In a world that sometimes feels strained by the clamor of differing tongues, I found myself at the center of a linguistic tug-of-war with my husband, Tom. I've always had a deep passion for the German language. It had been a part of my life since I was a child, nurtured by bedtime stories my grandmother would tell me in her lilting accent. When Tom and I met in college, I was amazed at how he soaked in those stories too, admiring my enthusiasm for a culture that seemed so distant to him, an American born and bred. Over the years, that admiration blossomed into love, but in the intimacy of our shared life, our once attractive differences began to fray at the edges. Tom studied German diligently for a while but soon found the nuances overwhelming, preferring to converse in the simple, comforting rhythms of English. But I loved to practice my German, and as the months slipped into years, it became my default language, a habitual comfort zone that I didn't realize was isolating him. One quiet evening after dinner, the familiar dance of our conversation took an unexpected turn when he asked me, gently but firmly, if I could refrain from speaking German at home as it sometimes made him feel excluded. The request struck me deeply. It felt like a rejection of a part of who I was, yet his eyes had that vulnerable glint that said he was struggling with his own feelings too. I was torn. Should I honor his request, sacrificing my linguistic flair for the sake of his comfort, or could I, in good conscience, continue speaking German, even if it meant detracting from our shared space? My thoughts churned that night, the shadows of self-doubt creeping in, mimicking our sad quiet as we ended the day. Was I the asshole for wanting to indulge in something that was such a part of me, or was I merely turning my back on a plea from the heart? Days turned into a strange dance of half-phrases in English and attempts at German that felt like a betrayal to the warmth and fluidity I thrived in. I saw flashes of disappointment in Tom's eyes each time I caught myself slipping back into my cherished words. It was an unnerving cycle. Each apology towards him felt like another nail in my own heart. The bright candlelight of our evenings dimmed, booths in our favorite restaurants filled with the silence of unspoken grievances. It wasn't until a particularly stormy night that we truly cracked open the chasm between us. Sitting in our living room, rain like a relentless drum on the roof, I finally laid bare my emotions. I told him how important it was for me to retain that part of my personality, that it felt as intrinsic to my being as breathing. And there in that cozy, rain-soaked space, our hearts opened wide, he admitted that while he loved me and admired my passion, he sometimes felt like he was on the outside looking in. It was a powerful exchange, raw and painful, but it was illuminated by an understanding that only deepened our bond. We spoke until the rain slowed, weaving through layers of our emotions, fears, and desires. By the end, we found a middle ground. We agreed that I could speak German during specific times, perhaps in moments of playfulness or passion, while committing to using English for our everyday conversations. It was a compromise born out of respect and love, a promise to nurture both my passion and his feelings. Months later, wrapped in the warmth of our love and mutual respect, I found joy in the sounds of both languages echoing through our home. I realized that love, like language, is best expressed in fluidity and understanding. We created our own little world, embracing a balance that felt harmonious, a beautiful cacophony of English conversations sprinkled with delightful German whispers. Sometimes, in those quiet moments, I catch Tom grinning when I slip into German to narrate a mundane event. It's a reassuring reminder that rather than diminishing our connection, my passion is woven seamlessly into our shared rhythm. It brings us closer, sparking late-night discussions about culture and identity, far more intimate than a mere exchange of words. As for my own internal conflict, it reshaped me into a partner who learned the beauty of compromise, whose heart echoes with gratitude for the understanding we carved from our differences. And on particularly slow afternoons, we sometimes find ourselves curled up with a book of German fairy tales, and for just a moment, the language that brought me to life becomes a bridge we walk hand in hand upon. However, our peaceful coexistence faced an unexpected challenge that I hadn't seen coming, and it started rather innocuously, with a flurry of messages from a close friend who was traveling to Germany. She was sending me pictures of charming villages, bustling markets, and the kind of enchanting landscapes that always called to my adventurous spirit. Each image ignited a longing within me, stirring the remnants of my passion for the language and culture as if I were being beckoned back to my roots. I found myself daydreaming about walking among the timber-framed houses of Rothenburg ob der Tauber, sipping coffee in a quaint cafe while laboriously picking apart the intricacies of my beloved language. With each ecstatic message I shared with my husband, Oliver, I ventured deeper into my reminiscing. But then a thought began to fester like a shadow in the back of my mind. I was slipping away from our shared language, and would that not create a rift again? In a moment that felt like a culmination of tension, I set my phone down and took a deep breath, deciding to tell him. One evening, while we prepared dinner, I casually mentioned how much I miss speaking German fluently. As I said those words, I felt the sparks that often flew between us dim just slightly. He cleared his throat, his back turned to me as the garlic sizzled in the pan. "You know it's hard for me when you speak that way," he replied softly, the uncharacteristic strain in his voice tinging my excitement with remorse. I felt the warmth of the kitchen wrap around us, but a chill crept into my heart. I could see where this was headed. I was about to dance on the edges of our previous discussions, tiptoeing around old insecurities. My mind raced as I weighed the prospect of expressing my desire against the well-worn caution of his sensitivity toward my enthusiasm. In his eyes, my love for the language sometimes felt like a conflation of identities, a risk that threatened to dilute the bond we had carefully rebuilt. It was never that he didn't appreciate the beauty of it, he just felt far removed from it, as if it were a melodious tune he couldn't fully hear. I offered a kind smile and said, "How about we practice together? Just a little? It might help us connect even more." For a moment, his shoulders dropped as if a weight had been lifted, and then that familiar tension began to creep back. "I don't want to feel left out," he said, a hint of defeat in his voice. It cut deep. I had unknowingly placed him into a familiar corner, a place that meant both of us retreading an old, risky narrative. Yet, this time, I saw an opportunity. Instead of focusing on our differences, I could bring him into my passion rather than pushing him away from it. I let silence envelop us, letting his thoughts swirl in the still air of the kitchen, and when it felt right, I proposed a solution. What if I spoke as fluently as I wanted, but also shared the meaning? I could help bridge the language too, like I did before. We could find a balance. Slowly, I watched as his frown morphed into thoughtfulness. "You truly want to bring me with you, don't you?" he asked with a cautious smile. "I do," I affirmed, the sincerity ringing in my heart, resonating through the air like the faint echo of a bell. Over the next few months, we began a new chapter together, one marked by our evenings spent in our cozy living room, dictionaries and notes sprawled around us, laughter punctuating the soft hum of our conversations. I shared with Oliver the stories behind the words, the richness of expressions and idioms that had once captivated me. I watched as his eyes lit up when unraveling the humor of a joke in German or realizing the affection imbued in a simple phrase. We even began to weave our private language, a blend of English and German that was uniquely ours. But with each passing week, our discussions deepened. The language, once a bridge and then a wall, transformed into a tapestry that enveloped us in colors of understanding. We talked about identity, culture, and our values, each thread strengthening the bond we had constructed over our differences. We shared our fears, Oliver expressing the insecurities of feeling linguistically inadequate, while I confessed my worries of losing touch with my heritage. And in those moments, the air filled with a shared understanding that surpassed words. Months later, as I nestled into the warmth of our oversized couch one rainy evening, surrounded by books and a steaming cup of herbal tea, it struck me how beautifully we had rebuilt our connection. The gray clouds draped outside, yet inside, it felt eternally sunlit with warmth and understanding. With my skin tingling from the memories of our journey, I decided to share our progress in a post on a Reddit community that focused on relationships. I titled my thread "A Myth Asshole WIBTAH If I Only Spoke German to My Husband Despite Him Requesting I Don't?" But as I typed, it felt less like a plea for validation and more a celebration of a love that had transcended language barriers. Lastly, I fondly recounted our journey, the blending of cultures, how we found our rhythm again, and I concluded with a question to the community: have you found harmony in your differences? As I posted it, a sense of relief washed over me. I had made it through a tumultuous chapter, and now we stood, hand in hand, ready to explore the landscapes of our vibrant, shared life together. Soon after, I received a wave of supportive and insightful replies, many expressing similar experiences, which encouraged me further. Later that night, as I drifted off to sleep, I looked over at Oliver, his peaceful face illuminated by the moonlight streaming through our window. I realized anew that love, much like language, is a journey, not a destination. Each step we took together unveiled not just the beauty in our differences, but also the harmony that lay within, patiently waiting to be discovered. As the soft glow of dawn began to fill our bedroom, I stirred awake to find Oliver already up, immersed in his morning ritual of brewing coffee. The rich aroma seeped through the air, weaving itself into the fabric of my thoughts. I watched him from the comfort of our rumpled bed, the way the sun kissed his tousled hair, and felt a swell of affection. This was our life, a gentle dance of routine and spontaneity. But underneath the surface, Excitement tinged with a sense of trepidation lingered. Today marked the beginning of my exploration into joining a local German conversation group. After my post online, a number of people had urged me to enhance my language skills further, not just for my own fulfillment but for the bridge it could build between Oliver and me. I knew he wanted me to improve my English as well, and while he supported my passion, there was still a mutual understanding hovering between us that needed to be navigated carefully. The group met in a cozy cafe downtown, where laughter mingled with the sounds of clinking cups and the soft whir of the espresso machine. As I stepped inside, the chatter seemed to swallow me whole. I spotted a table filled with fellow language adventurers, each with a story and a shared commitment to embracing a new tongue. With a nervous smile, I slid into an empty chair, the warmth of the gathering slowly enveloping me. Conversations took flight as we practiced phrases, stuttered over difficult pronunciations, and stumbled through the occasional awkward silence, laughter breaking the tension. I felt a spark of something familiar igniting within me, an eagerness to embrace the nuances. It was exhilarating, yet I couldn't shake the thought of Oliver, wondering if he would feel left out or if he was simply letting me fly on this new adventure. That evening, as we settled back into our routine, I couldn't help but share my excitement with Oliver. His face lit up with a genuine smile, yet beneath the enthusiasm, I sensed a flicker of apprehension. "It sounds amazing, actually," he said, pausing as if weighing his words carefully. "But promise me you'll still speak with me in English when we're home. I want you to feel free to express yourself with me fully." His earnest gaze met mine, sincerity draping each syllable in warmth. As I nodded, I could feel the weight of our unspoken understanding, a desire to balance my passion with the importance of our connection. However, the next few days were an exercise in self-discipline and compromise. I found myself wanting to slip into German more often, the phrases just at the tip of my tongue, eager to dance into the spaces we shared. But in doing so, I sometimes caught a glimpse of Oliver's discomfort, the furrowed brow when he couldn't follow my excitement, the brief silence when I spoke a sentence too rapid in my newfound confidence. This tug of war between my zeal and his request started to weigh on my heart. Were the walls I erected to protect my love inadvertently turning impenetrable? After a particularly frustrating attempt at explaining a simple story in German to him, resulting in more confusion than connection, I felt a rush of guilt clawing at my insides. I walked to the window, looking out at the twilight blending into night, the world outside a tapestry of muted colors. It struck me then how language, glorious as it could be, was a tool meant for connection, not division. Perhaps I had let my excitement overshadow the core of our relationship, and a wave of remorse flooded over me as I thought of our conversations where he patiently navigated between my two languages. That night, I made a decision. I turned to Oliver, who was curled up with a book of his own, and took a deep breath. "How about we create space for both?" I suggested softly, and he glanced up, surprise flickering across his features. "Let's set aside specific times for German. And when you're tired or lost, I'll be right here, ready to help you navigate back to English. Let's learn together." His eyes shone with a mix of understanding and relief as a smile broke across his face. In the following weeks, we embraced this newfound rhythm. Each night, we dipped into German for a little while, navigating through stories, fairy tales we both loved, or snippets from the news that intrigued us. When the words stumbled, we laughed until our stomachs hurt, and I cherished the look in his eyes as they sparkled with shared discovery and patience. Our evenings were filled with light-hearted attempts at pronunciation, playful teasing when one of us would mix up words, and the comforting realization that no matter the language, love threaded itself seamlessly between us. As I lay in bed amidst the whispers of night, I smiled, feeling a warmth blanket around my heart. I had aimed for fluency, but what I had found was something richer, an intimacy forged through compassion and understanding. Each mistake became a stepping stone, revealing the path that lay not just to understanding German, but deeper connections that breathed life into our relationship. The journey of language became a metaphor for our love story, filled with missteps yet painted with the beauty of growth, both together and individually. And as I reached for Oliver's hand, I realized that love, like language, was a living, breathing entity, forever expanding, ever changing, but always anchored in the safety of shared affection. It's funny how a single night can spiral so completely out of your control, all from a decision as simple as cracking open a bottle of wine. I've always been the type to unwind with a glass or two after a long day, especially when the world feels heavy and work drags on like a slow Friday. That night, my day had dragged on worse than usual. The air was thick with the tension of deadlines and uncomfortable office politics. I returned home, the warmth of the evening wrapping around me like a soft blanket, and I reached for the wine cooler with almost giddy anticipation. I poured myself a generous glass and sank into my overstuffed couch, the frustrations of the day gradually melting away with each sip. But I guess the day had taken a toll I hadn't quite realized, because before long, I reached for the second glass, and then another, the weight of the wine thickening my thoughts into a humorous haze. Somewhere around the third glass, there was a rustling in my fridge that caught my slightly inebriated attention. I was hungry, but not the kind of hunger that made sense, more like an instinctive need to munch on something savory, hearty, and utterly indulgent. Maybe it was the salami I had bought on a whim last week. I chuckled to myself thinking about it, visualizing how impressive it looked when I had opened the package, its beautiful marbling gleaming in the light. If I had been more sober, I might have put together some gourmet platter with cheese and crackers, but my thoughts veered toward the absurd. In a moment of reckless abandon, I decided a whole salami would do just fine. As I stood in my kitchen with the fridge door gaping open, I remember laughing at my reckless decision, pulling the salami from its resting place, marveling at how absurd it felt to hold such a hefty piece of meat. I didn't have a knife handy, so I chose to bite right into it, the flavor exploding in my mouth like something delightful. I didn't even care. The world outside faded, muffled by the blissful potato-like stupor I found myself immersed in. I must have lost track of time, because by the time I finally came to my senses, salami juice coating my fingers, and with the remnants of my drunken feast scattered across the counter, I couldn't believe the sight before me, an empty package and bits of sad deli wrapper strewn about like confetti. Reality crashed in, and it suddenly registered that I had devoured an entire salami all on my own, and guilt washed over me like a chilling wave. It wasn't just the thought that I'd eaten something almost obscene or the horror of waking up with a searing headache in the morning. I remembered my partner, Julia. She had worked late that evening, saving money for an upcoming vacation, and I could already envision the look on her face when she'd return home, tired and hungry, only to find her beloved salami, our salami, reduced to nothing but a pile of discarded packaging and a strong whiff of regret lingering in the air. Julia and I had been together for over 3 years, and though we loved to joke around about food, she had always been the more controlled one, meticulously planning her meals, practicing moderation, while I often danced on the edge of indulgence. I could already hear her teasing voice echoing in my mind, "What are you going to do now, a salami guru?" But there was an underlying current of seriousness in her words, a reflection of the way she nurtured our relationship, and how I often found myself straying away from that careful balance. I glanced at the clock, and panic set in as I realized she would be home any minute. My stomach lurched, not from nausea, but from an overwhelming sense of impending shame that wrapped around me tightly like a constricting boa. My phone vibrated on the counter, bringing me back to the present as I saw a message flash from Julia, "Heading home now. Can't wait to see you." Anxiety surged through me like an electric current. I felt like a guilty schoolboy caught stealing cookies from the kitchen jar. What was I supposed to say? "Hey, babe, I'm so glad you're home. I've just single-handedly eliminated your dinner plan." I could already imagine her disappointment, and the thought twisted in my gut like a knot. Desperate for a shield, I quickly surveyed the kitchen, hoping for a miracle. Maybe if I threw away the evidence, I could spin this whole fiasco into a plausible accident? The only problem was, how do I hide a midnight massacre of deli meat? I took a deep breath and swallowed my pride, though I'd already swallowed practically everything else that night. I decided to start cleaning up. My hands moved on autopilot as I shoved the crumpled plastic and packaging into the trash, but my mind was racing through thoughts of the awkward conversation that lay ahead. When Julia finally stepped through the door, fatigue etched into her features, my heart caught in my throat. "Hey, love," she greeted, her voice brightening the dimly lit kitchen as she dropped her bag. I offered a frantic wave, trying to act casual, but the look of pure shock on her face when she spotted the empty salami wrapper was unmistakable. It was as if someone had snuffed out all the light in the room. "You didn't," she said softly, her tone a mix of disbelief and hurt. I could feel the weight of her gaze pinning me to the spot, and my mouth suddenly felt too dry to muster an excuse. I got a little carried away," I stammered, my heart racing as I fought the urge to cringe. "I didn't mean to eat it all. I thought I'd just have a slice. But then it was just so good, and before I knew it, well..." My voice trailed off almost apologetically, as though the words themselves were woven from my own shame. Julia sighed, and the world shifted around us, the air heavy with uncomfortable tension. "I was saving that for the pasta we're making tomorrow," she replied, her eyes narrowing slightly, a shadow of disappointment dancing across her features. And then, the heaviness gave way to a laugh, surprising both of us. It came out of Julia, bubbling up from her gut, the laughter echoing in the small kitchen. It was such a genuine, clear sound that it caught me off guard. "You absolute lunatic," she exclaimed, still chuckling as she approached me, betrayal melting into amusement. Instead of anger, I saw the corners of her mouth curl upward, and something inside me shifted. The relief washed over me like the tide receding from the shore. Maybe I wasn't in as dire straits as I had imagined. "Okay, I might have gone overboard," I admitted, joining her laughter, feeling an unexpected lightness spread through my chest. "But can I at least make it up to you? What if I cook dinner, get some fresh ingredients?" Julia leaned in, bumping her hip against mine playfully. "You know I love your cooking," she replied with a kind glint in her eyes, the shadows of my initial transgression fading away. As we began brainstorming dinner ideas, the night transformed from one I thought would be filled with shame into something surprisingly warm and inviting. Small mistakes didn't have to unravel our bond. Instead, they could lead us to moments of laughter and connection. With every suggestion I tossed out, Julia's eyes sparkled more brightly, and it felt as though we were weaving a new story together, one where the salami mess was just a funny note and a melody we were crafting. And somehow, against a backdrop of guilt, that made me feel more like myself than ever. Days passed after that comedic episode, and I found myself reflecting on it, though I was startled by just how deeply it had changed the ambience between us. The little mishaps, forgetting to buy milk or dissecting a salad incorrectly, didn't seem so dreadful anymore. I learned the importance of sharing my mistakes with her, the value of vulnerability turning those potential storms into laughter. And maybe, on the other side of all this, I found a strength I hadn't known I possessed, the ability to embrace my imperfections, live fully in the moment, and trust that whatever the next late-night binge would be, we were solid together. I penned a quick post to our /confessions someday, sharing my humorous and slightly disastrous adventure with the whole salami, chuckling as I reflected on how a drunken binge could save a relationship instead of ruining it. After all, it wasn't just a salami, it was a reminder that love can rise above the clutter, to mend the small rifts and turn them into something larger, something alive with laughter. The next morning, as the sun filtered tentatively through the curtains, I braced myself for the inevitable fallout. My head throbbed with each pulse, reminding me of the regrettable decisions I had made the night before. Julia had fallen asleep in our bedroom, blissfully unaware of my indulgent escapade. I tiptoed to the kitchen, dread coiling in my stomach, and gazed at the carnage left behind, a sight that would undoubtedly elicit her trademark raised eyebrow and disappointed sigh. I brewed a pot of coffee, hoping its rich aroma would mask the odor of salami remnants, perhaps providing me just enough courage to face her. As I poured my first cup, I could hear the soft rustle of sheets behind me as Julia emerged, hair tousled and sleep in her eyes. "Morning, sleepyhead," I called out in what I hoped was a cheerful tone, trying to lift the impending gloom hanging over me. She smiled, but there was a flicker of suspicion in her gaze as she caught sight of the kitchen chaos. The moment of silence that followed was filled with unspoken questions, and I could feel her scanning the counter like a detective searching for clues in a crime scene. About that," I stammered, my tongue suddenly tied in knots. "I might have eaten something last night." Her eyebrow arched higher, and I could practically hear her mind racing through the possibilities before landing on an incredulous realization. "You didn't?" I felt the heat creeping up my neck, and my heart raced like a frantic hamster on its wheel. Well, yes, I did. All of it. The whole salami," I confessed, unable to hide how absurdly both mortifying and liberating the admission felt. To my surprise, Julia burst into laughter, which, in that moment, seemed like the best response I could have hoped for. "You're kidding. You seriously ate an entire salami by yourself?" Her laughter rang through the kitchen, reverberating against the walls like joyous music, and I couldn't help but join in, feeling the tension lift as I surrendered to the ridiculousness of it all. I explained how it had started innocently enough, a few drinks, a buzzing sense of invincibility, and winded my way through the entire tale, embellishing the details to evoke even more laughter. With every chuckle, I felt lighter, like scales tipping away from my guilt. "You know," she said, wiping a tear from the corner of her eye, "this is somewhat tragic. But also the most you thing you could have done. I can't believe it." I half-heartedly shrugged, admitting that perhaps it was all a little surreal to even me. Yet, as we shared that moment of levity, it occurred to me how the ridiculousness of the night had inched us closer together instead of causing a rift. We decided what better way to commemorate the absurdity than to create our own Salami Saturday tradition, turning an embarrassing confession into a shared joke that would surely linger in our memories for years to come. The laughter gradually faded into calm conversation, and over breakfast, we toasted to the weird hiccups of life that somehow knit us closer together. Reflecting on the night before, I acknowledged how that wild decision had given us a sweet, silly story, one that reminded me that vulnerability could be powerful. Life was never perfect, and neither were we, but that was part of the charm. In the aftermath, we found ourselves not just bonded through love but now with the added layer of laughter and a touch of absurdity. I knew then that, armed with our imperfections and a heightened sense of humor, we could navigate anything that came our way. Later, I decided to share this newfound perspective with the r/confessions community, crafting another post that detailed not just my reckless binge but how it had turned into an experience that reinforced our bond. In the end, it wasn't just a story of a salami but rather a reflection on partnership, acceptance, and the ability to find joy in even the most unexpected moments. I never thought my childhood resentment would follow me like a shadow, but here I am, finger hovering over the post button, ready to confess something I've kept bottled up for far too long. Growing up, my older brother Ryan was the constant reminder of how fragile life could be. Born with cerebral palsy, he navigated the world in a wheelchair and required assistance with nearly everything. I'm not ashamed to admit that, as his younger sibling, I often felt overshadowed by his circumstances. At family gatherings, all the attention was on him, his struggles, his achievements, the courage he showed just by waking up every day. I remember sitting on the sidelines, feeling invisible, watching our parents dote on him. It wasn't that I hated him, exactly, it was more like a simmering envy mixed with a profound discomfort about his condition that I didn't know how to express. This imbalance strained our relationship, especially as teenagers, when Ryan became more aware of his differences. I wanted to be the brother he looked up to, but instead, I often rolled my eyes or snapped back when he would ask for help. There was one instance I remember vividly. Ryan wanted to go to a concert in the city. He was so excited, beaming with that familiar spark that I rarely saw. I could feel all the pressure mounting. I didn't want to be seen as his caregiver, his protector, just another part of his life that would make me feel smaller. So, in a moment of selfishness, I told him I couldn't go. The disappointment etched on his face left me with an ache, but I convinced myself it was easier this way. Fast forward to a few years later, the day I got the call that he had passed away suddenly due to complications from his condition. It turned my world upside down. In an instant, the past evaporated, the resentment I had harbored turned into a tide of guilt that crashed over me, pulling me under. I found myself paralyzed by regret for all the times I hadn't been there for him when it mattered the most. I replayed those harsh words in my head like a broken record, and it's like every joy from my life had dimmed in his absence. Friends and family rallied around me, offering condolences, but nothing soothed the roar of what-ifs echoing in my mind. I missed my chance to be his brother. Months passed, and as I navigated this grief, I started volunteering at a local center for disabled individuals. It felt like an act of penance, but it also opened my eyes to a world I had distanced myself from. I met so many incredible people with stories that mirrored Ryan's in some ways, and I slowly began to understand the beauty of vulnerability and strength coexisting. With each moment spent there, I felt a piece of my heart begin to mend. But what still haunted me was the anger I held towards myself. I carried a journal where I poured out my thoughts, my regrets, my moments of clarity. The act of writing became a conduit for healing I didn't know I needed, a way to say all the things I never got to say to Ryan. In one entry, I finally allowed myself to say it. I loved him. I missed him like a part of myself had been ripped away. I wished I could go back and change the past, but I also started to realize that perhaps he wouldn't want me to. Perhaps he would want me to live fully, to embrace the beauty of his memory instead of being trapped in guilt. As I sit here now, sharing this with whoever may read it, I've come to understand that sometimes our flaws and regrets shape who we become. It is a bittersweet ache, the acknowledgement of our humanity wrapped in love and loss. I can't undo what was done, and maybe that's okay. In the quiet moments, I find solace in thinking of Ryan, not as the brother I lost, but as the inspiration behind my growth, reminding me to cherish each day, to express love freely, and to reach out to those who need it most. Maybe one day, I'll pay this forward, transforming that shadow of regret into something brighter, something more profound. So here I am, hoping that others who feel the weight of unspoken words or unresolved feelings can find comfort in the fact that it's never too late to reach out, to forgive, even if that means forgiving yourself. Take it from someone who learned too late, love, in all its forms, is always worth it. As for the update, I recently went to a support group for siblings of people with disabilities, where I found the courage to share my story. And in doing so, I discovered that many others carry similar burdens of guilt and regret. Together, we're finding healing, slowly, but surely, and with each meeting, I feel more at peace with my past. Maybe Ryan's legacy is alive within us all, reminding us to love fiercely and without reservation. The sun dipped low on the horizon, casting a warm, golden hue across the park where I had spent many afternoons with Ryan, my older brother. It was a place filled with echoes of laughter and fleeting moments that now felt bittersweet. As I watched the leaves fluttering gently in the breeze, I was reminded of the stories we shared, his dry humor mixed with the uncanny ability to see life through an entirely different lens because of his disability. It was a perspective I often struggled to appreciate when I was younger. I had resented how my teenage life revolved around the concerns of his care rather than my own budding independence. I had seen him as a burden, an impediment to my social life, instead of the unique person he truly was. This resentment had sparked a schism between us, one that grew wider with each passing year until Ryan's quiet acceptance of my disdain made him retreat into himself. I wish I could go back and tell my younger self that his wheelchair wasn't a shackle, but rather a different avenue of viewing the world, one colored with resilience and strength. I remember vividly the day he passed, the cold starkness of that winter morning, a stark contrast to the warmth of memories we shared. The hospital room felt suffocating. Filled with machines that buzzed quietly, marking the slow passage of time. I sat there, frozen, as a flood of emotions enveloped me like a heavy blanket. Guilt gnawed at me, biting through my bravado as I scrolled through old pictures on my phone. I dreaded looking at them, afraid of what I might find, scenes of a childhood that had become tainted by my bitterness. In those final moments, I watched Ryan's chest rise and fall with increasing effort, each breath a painful reminder of both his fragility and strength. Tears slipped down my cheeks as I held his hand and whispered apologies, but I knew he wouldn't hear them. I felt an ache deep within me, a longing for those missed chances at reconciliation that could never be reclaimed. At the support group, I listened as others shared their stories, each personal tale a thread in a tapestry woven with guilt, regret, and ultimately, a profound love that transcended hardship. In those meetings, I recognized a shared human experience, our collective pain transformed into a bridge that connected us. One gentleman spoke of a similarly fraught relationship with his sister, and the eerie parallel struck a chord in me. The atmosphere shifted, we were no longer bound by our grief but united in our desire to heal. Slowly, I began to breathe again, letting go of the burdens I had carried for so long. I found comfort in the idea that it was okay to be imperfect, to have made mistakes. Ryan's legacy lived on, not merely as a memory but as a catalyst for change in my heart and perhaps even in the hearts of those around me. Each week, I faced the mirror of my past, and instead of seeing a villain, I began to recognize a lost child yearning for understanding. I realized that my regret could shape me, not break me, guiding me towards a gentler interaction with others, particularly in accepting their differences. Life, I had come to acknowledge, is interwoven with those we love, and the threads can be frayed and frayed again, but they always hold potential for strength and beauty if we're willing to stitch them back. Leaving the support group one evening, I paused at the entrance of the park where Ryan and I often played. Under the sprawling oak tree where his laughter once danced with the wind, I felt an unexpected sense of comfort. I closed my eyes and whispered, "I'm sorry, Ryan," allowing the breeze to carry my words into the quiet night. With that, I felt weight lifting, not because I had excused my past, but because I was beginning to forgive myself. I marked that moment, a turning point in my journey of healing, knowing that even as I carry my brother's absence in my heart, I can cherish the love he gifted me. It wasn't about erasing the hurt but embracing it, learning from it. Perhaps, in his own way, he was still teaching me lessons on compassion and connection, and now, armed with awareness, I aspire to keep those lessons alive, allowing his spirit to guide me on this path of love and acceptance. With each passing week, as I attended those support group meetings, I felt more in tune with the threads of my life, a tapestry woven with the vibrant colors of grief, guilt, love, and hope. I could see the connections forming among the group, comprised of siblings who held similar burdens of regret and sorrow. The first time I shared my story publicly, I was trembling, my voice barely above a whisper as I spoke Ryan's name. The room was silent, marked by a vulnerability that seemed to hover in the air, and as I revealed my struggles, I could see the understanding reflected in the eyes of my fellow attendees. They, too, had carried the weight of resentment at times, feeling as though the world had placed them on an uneven playing field due to the circumstances of their siblings' disabilities. The empathy in that room was profound. It was a shared solace amid pain, a recognition that we often struggled to balance our own lives while supporting loved ones who required so much more. I found myself embraced not just by comforting words, but by the compassion of people who understood the longing for unspoken words between siblings, the pent-up frustration when love felt too expansive to contain, and the aching emptiness that arises when that love is lost. My healing journey began to manifest in other areas of my life as well. I became more present, embracing quiet moments with my parents, who were also grieving their own loss in a way I hadn't fully appreciated before. One evening, while sifting through old family photos, I discovered a treasure trove of moments I had forgotten, a snapshot of Ryan laughing in the sun, his face lit up with joy, surrounded by our family. That image stirred something within me. I resolved to honor his memory by deepening my connections with everyone I cherished, to embrace the whole spectrum of love Ryan had shown me. On rainy days, I would sit by the window, reminiscent of our childhood, where we would watch the world outside, chatting about the mundane and the extraordinary as we let the droplets blur the outside world. I missed those moments, the pure simplicity in which love existed without the complexities we adultified as we grew older. Those memories became my sanctuary, guiding me through my days, illuminating the parts of my character that had dimmed beneath a palette of guilt and resentment. As the support group sessions progressed, our conversations morphed into gatherings that felt more akin to family reunions. We laughed, cried, and shared recipes that were inspired by those we loved. One evening, after a particularly intense session where we spoke about our aspirations to be better siblings, we all decided to take a step further. We would host a community picnic in honor of each of our siblings, a chance to celebrate their personalities, their quirks, and the joy they brought into our lives. As we organized the event, it sparked something within me. I found myself navigating through my grief with a renewed intention. One that shone brightly for all who were willing to see. The day of the picnic was etched in gold, with a gentle breeze whispering through the park and the laughter of children drifting into the sky. Each family brought dishes that carried stories, mementos of lives lived fully despite challenges. I watched as we all shared anecdotes about our siblings, revealing layers of their existence that showcased the love that overshadowed the hardships. It turned out that Ryan's peculiar fascination with the stars and space was inherited. Others in the group shared similar fascinations. They spoke of their siblings with pride, recounting stories that illustrated resilience forged in concrete challenges. The picnic soon transformed from a gathering of remembrance to a celebration of life itself. When the sun dipped low, casting a golden hue across the park, I stood with a plate in hand, looking at the vivid display of community spirit before me. There was Ryan's favorite dish, a pasta salad my mother always made for him, adorned with fresh herbs from our garden. As I took a moment to breathe, a wave of appreciation washed over me. I realized that every bite echoed through time, a delicious reminder that in the face of heartache, connection thrives. I took that memory of Ryan, intertwined with every laugh shared and every story told that day, and tucked it gently into my heart, marking it as a chapter of my growth. Now, each morning I would wake to a sense of purpose. I carry the lessons of compassion he taught me, reaching forward with open arms to everyone I encounter. Though the guilt sometimes creeps in during quiet moments, I remind myself that healing is not linear. It's the beautiful chaos of learning how to love again fully, how to mend the heart even when it feels frayed by the threads of loss. I understand that the journey is ongoing, but I allow for its ebbs and flows, fully aware of the light Ryan ignited within me. With that glow, I walk forward, striving to share that brilliance with others, a testament to my brother's enduring spirit. I smile more often now, and though the nights may still carry a tinge of sadness, I hold on to the memory of love, ensuring that part of him will never fade as long as I remain open to the connections and love around me. I never thought my day would take such a bizarre turn, but then again, life has a funny way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. It started like any other Saturday. I had decided to treat myself to a day at the local spa, a hidden gem nestled between two bustling streets, known only to locals and those who frequented hot yoga. I felt the weight of the week lifting off my shoulders as I stepped through the glass doors, the scent of lavender and eucalyptus wrapping around me like a warm blanket. After a long week of work and a slight spat with my partner, I craved a little self-love, and nothing screamed indulgence more than a day spent in soothing baths and rejuvenating treatments. When I finally made my way to the changing room, the bright lights flickered slightly, and the mirrors reflected an array of individuals, all preparing to unwind and ultimately transform into their most relaxed selves. I glanced at my watch and realized I had plenty of time before my appointment, so I took a moment to center myself, unhurried by the world outside. As I stood there, draped in my oversized robe, a wave of spontaneity washed over me. Maybe it was the tranquil ambience or perhaps the lingering frustration from the previous week that nudged me toward what I would later refer to as my confident, yet reckless moment. I could hear faint laughter and casual chatter coming from outside the changing room, the sound of people enjoying each other's company, and I suddenly felt the urge to join in on that liberation. With a mischievous smile creeping onto my face, I slowly peeled off the robe, shrugging it off as though it were nothing more than a layer of mundane responsibility. Standing fully naked in front of the grand mirror, I marveled at myself, feeling unburdened. But the moment I turned around and stepped out, my heart raced as I realized the gravity of what I was about to do. The short hallway leading toward the relaxation area was adorned with serene wall art, pieces capturing nature in beautiful, muted tones. But just as I stepped out, I heard laughter that was suddenly interrupted by sharp gasps. I froze. Standing there in my full glory, I felt the cool air wrap around me, prickling my skin and sending a flush of heat to my cheeks. In that instant, embarrassment overwhelmed me, but something deeper held me rooted to the spot, a strange exhilaration laced with vulnerability. I had expected free love in the spa community, but this was a little different. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw 3 women nearby, clad in bright, patterned bikinis and matching smiles that slowly turned into bemused expressions. One was whispering to her friends, her hand covering her mouth in playful disbelief. "Wah," one murmured, barely concealing her laughter. The tension hung thick in the air, thick enough to cut with a knife. My pulse quickened. Was I about to become the subject of ridicule? A sudden wave of doubt crashed over me. I debated retreating back into the changing room, cloaking myself in that robe once again to hide from what I assumed would be a brewing storm of judgment. But the realization of what it felt like to be exposed illuminated my mind. Nakedness, in this moment, was oddly liberating. I could either succumb to the laughter and quickly shroud myself in shame, or I could own this impulsive act and confront the crowd with a light heart. With 3 deep breaths, I mustered the courage I usually reserved for bigger battles and nonchalantly strolled past them, my chin slightly raised, pretending this was just another day in my life. I heard whispers of "Is she serious? And is this a prank?" floating behind me, but instead of crumbling, it felt exhilarating. I found a corner with plush lounge chairs and settled into one, soaking up the warmth that radiated throughout the room. The whispers faded as the serene ambience seeped back in. As I reclined, a persistent thought flickered in my mind. Was I the asshole here for setting such a bizarre precedent? Or was this simply a testament to self-acceptance? Hours passed, the sun drifting just out of sight, and I eventually retreated back to the changing room, a soft smile lingering on my lips. As I slipped back into my robe, I overheard one of the women from earlier discussing their visit while I made my way back across the main hall. I couldn't quite catch their words, but snippets like "that was really brave" caught my attention, draping warmth over my prior embarrassment, transforming it into something uplifting. Back in the sanctuary of my robe, I couldn't help but reflect on those moments of unexpected bravery. Perhaps it didn't matter whether I was the asshole or the hero. In that light-hearted chaos, I had reclaimed a sense of freedom I had long forgotten, something deeper than just a physical state. It was an emotional release. Later, I found myself drafting a post titled "AITA for getting fully naked in a public changing room?" on a popular forum. I recounted the entire day, weaving in my feelings and capturing my tiny triumph nestled within an absurd situation. As I hit post, I realized that whichever way the opinions rolled, the narrative of that day would always chase me into the calmer corners of my mind, reminding me that in life, embracing vulnerability is often the truest form of strength. And as I drifted off to sleep that night, a content laugh escaped my lips when I thought how wonderfully bizarre life could be. The next morning, I awoke with a sense of lightness, a mellow nostalgia washing over me as I recalled the previous day's events. I had anticipated a barrage of judgment when I posted my story online, half expecting to be branded a social pariah for my audacious decision to strip down in a public changing room. Instead, I found myself navigating through a cascade of comments ranging from sympathetic to hilariously incredulous. People weren't just concerned about my nakedness, they shared their own stories of embarrassment, vulnerability, and the mighty human spirit that often rallies around moments of mortification. I brewed a cup of tea, the steam curling in the cool morning air, as I read through the comments. A particularly kind response struck me. Someone had remarked, "Being comfortable in your own skin is a rebellion worth celebrating." This notion anchored itself in my mind. It sparked a lingering warmth that encouraged me to shed the lingering anxieties I had faced in the past, self-doubt, the fear of being judged, and the incessant worry about societal norms. With renewed energy, I decided to take a long walk, letting the crisp autumn air fill my lungs. I meandered through the park, where the leaves danced around me in hues of yellow and orange, the sunlight filtering through the branches in a gentle, dappled embrace. I pondered what it meant to be truly comfortable, not just with my body but with my choices, every decision I had made. Each step felt liberating, almost like the last remnants of my previous anxieties were falling away with the leaves surrounding me. I stopped by a small cafe that I loved, the aroma of brewed coffee wafting through the air, intermingling with the sweetness of cinnamon pastries. As I sipped my coffee, I found myself reflecting on the connections I had formed, both online and offline, during this whimsical escapade. I felt that my experience had resonated with others, which tethered us together in a peculiar yet comforting way. Over the next few days, my post garnered even more attention, sparking long threads of laughter, solace, and the gentle reminder that we all share uncomfortable experiences, stretching beyond the boundaries of physical nakedness. I began to see vulnerability as a shared human element, one that spurred empathy and laughter. Friends would message me, recounting their own tales of embarrassment, like the time my friend Jane overshot her runway in a fashion show and fell, or when Adam, who, outside of his exterior of suave confidence, nervously tripped during his first workplace presentation, turning a simple slide into an impromptu comedy show. Each story illuminated a part of our shared human experience, and as I shared some of my own, laughter echoed across our group chats, creating an unspoken bond. These little encounters began to shape a new narrative in my life, where I felt more at ease, more present in each moment. Days turned into weeks, and I found myself less concerned about societal expectations and more focused on engaging with the world as it came. I joined a local yoga class, a decision both alarming and thrilling, pushing my comfort zone further. One evening during class, as I stood in tree pose, balancing precariously on one foot, I caught a fleeting glance of a woman across the room who was visibly struggling to find her balance. And suddenly, with an explosion of compassion, I felt an unspoken connection with her, an understanding that we were both navigating our paths through uncertainty. I smiled at her, and she smiled back, a shared moment of grace in the midst of awkwardness. As that year drew to a close, I looked back at my initial post, the snapshot of a day that seemed so trivial yet transformed into a deep personal journey. Initially, I thought I was merely sharing a funny story to lighten someone's day, but in reality, I had opened up a discussion about vulnerability and acceptance, leading to significant changes in how I viewed myself and others. I learned that my story was not just about a naked moment in a changing room but about the courage to embrace my true self, flaws and all, amidst a world that often felt all too critical. Feeling contemplative one evening, I decided to post an update on the forum, not out of obligation, but as a gentle reminder to those who had reacted to my original story. I wrote about the shifts in my life, how those reactions had inspired a newfound confidence in me and how discovering the beauty and vulnerability granted me profound connections that weave through my daily existence. As I submitted the post, a sense of satisfaction enveloped me. I had turned a single incident of discomfort into a thriving, gentle dialogue about strength and acceptance that echoed beyond my personal bubble. Life continued to be wonderfully bizarre, as it always had been, a twisted tapestry woven with laughter, vulnerability, and an unwavering belief in the power of connection, one story at a time. The following days unfolded lazily, wrapped in the glow of my newfound perspective. I found myself contemplating my previous anxieties, those little thoughts that gnawed at my self-esteem like mice in the attic. My encounters in that public changing room had spiraled into a revelation, guiding me to appreciate my body and my story without the weight of judgment. I began to notice the world around me anew. A woman in a coffee shop laughed heartily with friends while an elderly man danced with his cane to a street musician's tune. Each moment felt pregnant with life, vibrating with stories often left unsaid, and suddenly my heart felt expansive, capable of weaving connections in ways I had never considered. Encouraged by the sentiment brewing inside me, I decided to revisit the gym, the source of that awkward changing room encounter. The scent of eucalyptus wafting through the air as I entered the facility felt oddly comforting. I felt a strange sense of belonging among the machines and weights. Everyone around me was lost in their own rhythm, striving for their goals, emotionally clad as they worked on forms that were poised for twists, triumphs, and sometimes, embarrassing moments. I chuckled to myself, envisioning how I could transform any discomfort into laughter. As I moved towards the changing areas, my stomach fluttered but not with the anxiety I had felt before. Instead, it was more akin to excitement, an anticipatory spark reminding me that uncertainty was merely a precursor to growth. In the changing room, I opted for a middle ground, I wore a bathing suit top with airy shorts rather than resorting to the bold nudity I'd displayed previously. As I slipped off my clothes, I noticed my reflection and paused. There was a freedom in shedding my anxiety like an old skin. I lifted my head a little higher, mockingly posing as if to a mirror audience, smirking at the absurdity of it all. The building's soft hum filled the space as I stepped out to face the world once again. To my surprise, I was soon greeted by warmer smiles, including a nod of recognition from a fellow gym-goer I had shared glances with in the past. Later, I basked in the pool, savoring every ripple and splash, feeling liberated by the sunlight dancing off the water's surface. Laughter echoed around me, a melodious reminder of a world that thrived on connection. I chatted with a few other swimmers, exchanging snippets of life stories, casual and straightforward, but it felt meaningful. It was that unassuming atmosphere of energy that bound us together, all of us in our own respective journeys. After what felt like hours in the sun and splashes, I returned home and opened my laptop, eager to check the reactions to my Reddit post. The responses were a vibrant tapestry of empathy, humor, and shared experiences. People opened up about their own vulnerable moments, their ridiculous mishaps, moments of embarrassment, and those flickering instances of undeniable human connection. I felt a profound sense of community enveloping me as I read through each comment. I even chuckled at a few amusing takes, like a user admitting to accidentally wearing mismatched socks for a week straight because they were too scared to ask for help. As I pondered whether I should share more of my own stories, I reflected on how small moments could birth camaraderie. So, I decided to embark on a new journey, crafting tales of awkwardness and vulnerability, blending them into reminiscent essays to share with my newfound community. I felt an invigorating kinship growing, a feeling that perhaps, by exposing our flaws, we help others feel less isolated in their own. That night, as I lay in bed, the quiet hum of the world surrounding me, I felt grateful for the vibrant narrative life presented. I nestled deeper into my covers, casting my mind back to the changing room encounter, relishing in how a single moment of embarrassment had catalyzed a wave of transformation within me. Perhaps my initial question of whether I was the asshole had been answered. It was never about the nakedness itself. In bearing my vulnerabilities, I ultimately found strength, lightened by connection, and I drifted off, smiling at the thought of the everyday absurdities and the beautifully shared experiences yet to come. When I first moved into my college dorm, I was filled with a mix of excitement and fear. Living away from home meant newfound freedom coupled with a whole lot of responsibility, but nothing quite prepared me for becoming a reluctant pet owner. My roommate, Jamie, had a long-haired tabby cat named Oliver, a fluffy bundle of mischief that seemed to have an uncanny ability to detect when I was vulnerable, and despite my initial hesitation toward sharing my space with an animal, I found that I could tolerate Oliver's antics, until that fateful Tuesday afternoon. It had been a long day filled with back-to-back classes and a looming assignment I was struggling to tackle. I returned to our dorm, a small space cluttered with books, clothes, and the ever-present scent of takeout. The moment I settled into my bed, ready to drown out the world with some music, I heard Jamie's voice carry through the thin walls as she chatted with friends. I could hear laughter and the clinking of glasses, a stark contrast to the chaotic storm of thoughts whirling in my mind about deadlines and future plans. It wasn't long before Oliver, as if sensing my solitude, poked his head through the door, his wide yellow eyes fixed on me. "Not now, Oliver," I murmured, hoping to ward him off with my exhaustion, but, as it turns out, nothing could deter his determination. He wiggled through the slightly ajar door and hopped onto my bed, his presence filling me with a mixture of annoyance and reluctant affection. I gently shoved him off, trying to reclaim the boundaries I had set around my personal space, but I couldn't help but chuckle as he stared up at me, his ears twitching with every sound in the room. Then came the moment that seized my attention and left me questioning my sanity. Oliver, in a burst of unexpected empathy, nuzzled his face against my hand, then proceeded to bat at my fingers as if to say, "I'm really sorry for intruding. See how cute I am?" I blinked in disbelief, half wondering if I had gone mad or if this was just a cleverly plotted scheme orchestrated by my roommate. "You really think a cat can apologize?" I thought, lowering my hand hesitantly. The warmth of his fur was oddly comforting. Yet that comforting feeling quickly twisted into discomfort as Jamie burst into my room, beaming with pride for her well-behaved cat. "Do you see him apologizing?" she joked, and I couldn't help but feel a tight knot of frustration building in my chest. I had set boundaries for a reason. I needed that space to unwind, to think, and to not feel like I was babysitting a creature who had no concept of personal space. "Maybe he's learned how to be more considerate," Jamie added, but the playful tone felt dismissive of my true predicament. The following day became a cycle of Oliver seeking me out, sitting on my desk as I tried to study, performing antics to win my affection, and despite my best efforts to keep him at bay, I found myself secretly charmed. However, a tipping point came when, the next day, he curled into my lap while I was engrossed in reading. I felt warmth radiating from him, and suddenly, it felt like Oliver had transformed into an emotional semaphore, signaling that I wasn't alone despite all the chaos around me. Just as soon as the joy of that connection blossomed, the reality of our living situation crashed into it. I realized that I wasn't just fighting against a cat, I was fighting against the inklings of companionship that came with it, the roots of connection that dug deep into my reserved heart that I had not anticipated. So when Oliver came to me yet again, his head bowing slightly as he gazed with those imploring eyes as if he understood my troubles, I took a breath and softly said, "You can come in, but only this once." In that moment, there was an undeniable shift, not just between me and Oliver, but within myself as well. It felt strangely cathartic to open my door, both literally and metaphorically, allowing this little creature to occupy not just my space but also my weary heart. As days turned into weeks, I found more peace in cohabiting with Jamie and Oliver than I could have ever imagined. I started sharing moments with Oliver where his purring soothed my anxieties, moments where Jamie and I would laugh as Oliver got himself tangled in random objects in the room, and before I knew it, our space felt less like a cold dormitory and more like home. My fears of losing control over my personal space diminished, and I learned to embrace the chaos that comes with companionship. In the end, I couldn't tell if I was the asshole for trying to maintain my boundaries or if I had simply been afraid of letting someone, or something, new into my life. Perhaps some apologies, whether from a person or a cat, don't need to be spoken at all. Update: a couple of months later, Jamie and I decided to adopt a second cat. In a way, it felt as if Oliver had guided me to accept that sometimes, it's okay to let in what makes us feel alive, especially when it comes in the form of warmth, purrs, and unexpected companionship. Reflecting back on that pivotal moment with Oliver still evokes a swirl of emotions within me. I sat on my bed, surrounded by familiar comforts, the soft glow of fairy lights illuminating the corners of my room, the gentle scent of lavender wafting through the air. Everything felt just as it had for weeks, a safe, predictable cocoon. After the strange encounter with Oliver, I had decided to uphold my boundaries, uncertain yet relieved at my resolve. But as the chill of fall drifted into winter, my heart began to soften, and I noticed the joyous familiarity of my life gradually morphing into something deeper. Jamie often shared stories, enthusiastic and filled with laughter, about Oliver's antics, how he would curiously poke around the fridge or chase after the sunlight that streamed through our windows each morning. I could feel the warmth in her voice, the way Oliver brought light into our shared space, and yet, I found myself struggling with the thought of letting go of my well-guarded solitude. Days turned into weeks, and while I maintained my distance from the cat, I also began to observe him quietly from a distance. His emerald eyes held a wisdom that I could sense, almost as if he understood my hesitation but remained unbothered by it. There was something almost enchanting about how he'd stretch languidly by the warmth of the radiator, echoing the simple tranquility I craved yet feared. Slowly, I began to warm to his presence, not so much in a grand gesture, but through those small, almost negligent interactions, like when I would stand in the kitchen and catch him watching me as if waiting for an invitation into my life. It surprised me how quickly I started to miss him during those moments I chose to withdraw into my room, loathing how I had created such a divide between us with my own fears. I found myself half-consciously leaving my door ajar at night, just to catch the rhythm of his soft padding outside, an unspoken invitation for him to join me should he so choose. Finally, when Jamie suggested we adopt a second cat, a rush of emotions flared within me: fear, excitement, and a surprising sense of relief. I realized then that perhaps my self-imposed barriers had been choking me much more than any intrusion of Oliver ever could. As Jamie collected supplies and eagerly researched rescue shelters, I felt a gentle nudge toward acceptance, the idea of companionship igniting something long dormant within me. When we first met our new feline friend, a timid little bundle of gray with striking blue eyes, it felt surreal in a way that made my heart race. As Jamie gently coaxed the shy kitten forward, I felt Oliver rub against my leg, almost as if he already understood his role in this new chapter. They seemed to know what it was like to be on the fringes of solitude. Maybe, just maybe, they had both offered me a chance to be part of their world, urging me to step outside the walls I had so carefully crafted. With time and patience, the two cats became inseparable companions, and in a way, they mirrored my own journey, growth born from vulnerability. They would sprawl across my lap as I began to read or watch TV, the tiny burbles of purrs resonating with a newfound symphony of warmth. I found joy in their elegance and mischief, how they filled the spaces I had once deliberately kept empty. A few evenings later, as we settled on the couch together, I glanced at Oliver, who nestled close beside my new kitten, and it struck me clear, they offered me not just companionship but a sense of belonging, a reassurance that life was meant to be shared, even with those who might initially feel foreign. Moving forward, I learned to trust my instincts, realizing that letting in love and connection also meant unearthing parts of myself I had neglected. The warmth of their presence became my nightly solace, and as I drifted off, I understood that sometimes, the greatest apologies are those we find in the simple act of letting go, of making space for what makes us feel alive, a realization I will carry with me long into the night. As we settled into our new routine with the two cats, Oliver and our new addition, Luna, I found a sense of peace creeping into my life that I hadn't anticipated. Initially, I worried that introducing another feline into our already chaotic household might upset the delicate balance we had achieved. But Luna, with her soft black fur and mischievous eyes that sparkled with playful curiosity, helped to soothe those fears. She immediately took to Oliver, who, despite his regal demeanor, slipped into the role of doting big brother almost instinctively. Watching them wrestle and chase one another around our small apartment filled me with a joy I had almost forgotten existed. Each evening, as I snuggled under my favorite blanket, I reveled in the sound of their joyful antics, the gentle thrum of purring united in a symphony of comfort that lulled me into tranquility. Luna, with her dynamic energy, brought an unexpected vibrancy to my once quiet nights. It felt like she had unlocked something within me, something that craved interaction, warmth, and connection. I began to share my thoughts and dreams aloud, sometimes to myself while I sat on the couch, the cats curled up beside me, and I realized it wasn't just a one-sided conversation. Their feline presence felt like a mirror reflecting my own growth. I found myself questioning what other parts of my life I had unknowingly restricted with self-imposed barriers, so I began allowing friends over more often, fostering deeper relationships and inviting them into the sanctuary I had created. Jamie noticed the change, too. We laughed more, shared quiet meals where silence felt comfortable rather than suffocating. It was as if Oliver and Luna were not simply pets but ambassadors of companionship, urging me to embrace vulnerability. The change wasn't always easy. There were moments when the weight of the world would push against my chest, reminding me of past moments when I had tucked myself away. A few months in, I had what I thought was an innocuous conversation with Jamie about my feelings. I shared how I had been reflecting on why I had initially refused Oliver's well-meant apology, recounting how I now understood that love sometimes requires us to open our doors, be they metaphorical or literal, to those we fear might disturb our carefully crafted solitude. Jamie nodded thoughtfully, offering me a smile that was understanding yet tinged with sadness, and in that moment, I recognized the strength within vulnerability. It was okay to feel afraid, it was okay to be uncertain. I realize now that receiving love, whether it's from a person or a furry companion, meant stepping into the unknown, but it is also where the most profound connections could blossom. The days became less about confrontation and more about connection. About sharing our lives openly rather than behind walls built from past hurts. Then came the night that brought everything together, a night that served as a reminder of the journey I had taken since Oliver's heartfelt apology. It was a brisk winter evening, and I settled down to enjoy a quiet night with a cup of tea. The world outside was painted in white, the street lamps casting a warm glow against the snow, while inside, my two cats curled contentedly on my legs. I flipped open my journal, a ritual I had embraced as I gathered my thoughts, documenting the emotional clarity that had graced my life in recent months. Suddenly, Oliver leapt from my lap onto the desk, his little paws tapping against the pages until he settled beside me, staring up with those piercing green eyes as if he were reading my mind. It struck me that there was a profound sense of gratitude swelling within me, gratitude not just for Oliver and Luna but for the whole journey that had brought me to this moment. I leaned down, giving Oliver a gentle scratch behind the ears, and said aloud, "Thank you for teaching me how to love again." When Luna nudged her head against my hand, insisting on her share of affection, I felt an overwhelming sense of connection, a comforting reminder that sometimes the most precious breakthroughs come from the most unexpected places. In the blend of their fuzzy warmth and the tranquil ambience of the room, I embraced the idea that letting go of boundaries could be liberating, not just for myself but for the new family we were building together. As I closed my journal and let the stillness envelop me, I understood that life thrives in shared warmth, and perhaps, the most genuine apologies come wrapped in the soft fur of those who teach us the value of presence, love, and belonging. Hiding my expensive shampoo and conditioner from my friend's guest wasn't a decision I took lightly, but as I stood in my small, dimly lit bathroom, I felt a mix of anxiety and determination swirling in my chest. I worked hard to earn the little luxuries in my life, especially my indulgent hair products that had become something of a personal ritual. To call them expensive seemed an understatement. They were a splurge, a treat for myself after months of saving and budgeting. My bathroom had always felt like a sanctuary, a place where I could retreat from the chaos of the outside world. I kept it meticulously organized, arranging everything on its shelves with care. But recently, a shadow had crossed the threshold of my sanctuary: Jess, my impulsive yet adventurous friend who had just moved into her new apartment. She invited me over often, and I loved spending time in her vibrant, chaotic space. However, Jess had this adorable but reckless knack for inviting people to stay over without asking, and her latest guest, Tara, seemed to embody all of Jess's wildest impulses. The first time Tara crashed at Jess's place, I was surprised at how quickly the two hit it off. Tara was a friend of a friend, someone I hadn't known well but instantly sensed was not particularly mindful of personal boundaries, especially when it came to possessions that didn't belong to her. When I learned she was staying for a few weeks, I started to feel uneasy, especially about my beloved shampoo and conditioner that I'd proudly displayed on my bathroom shelf. My routine had always included a lavish wash and condition cycle that lulled me into a sense of peace. I dreaded the idea of Tara, with her carelessness, pouring things out like they were a bottle of cheap soda. I couldn't help but imagine the horror of her washing her hair with my expensive products, treating them like mere souvenirs from the drugstore. Gradually, the creeping anxiety prompted me to act. One night, armed with the notion that this was, quite simply, my hair ritual we were talking about, I tucked both bottles away in the back corner of my closet, swaddled in soft towels, the equivalent of a security blanket. It felt a bit ridiculous, but as I tucked the last towel around them, a sense of relief washed over me like a soothing balm. I convinced myself this wasn't about being selfish, it was about protecting a cherished part of my routine. Yet, the first morning after doing so, a wave of guilt crashed over me. I knew Jess would find it odd if Tara expressed interest in trying to use my products and got no response. That guilt clung to me through breakfast, settling deep in my stomach as Jess happened to mention Tara's curiosity about my shower setup. A part of me wanted to say, "Oh, I hid my shampoo," but I never found the words. Instead, I casually brushed it off, hoping Jess would do the same. That evening, as I basked in my freshly cleaned hair, I overheard Jess telling Tara about my shampoo and conditioner. I felt my heart speed up. I knew she could have easily sought them out. The sheer panic coursing through me was further amplified when I overheard Tara excitedly asking if she could use them. Oh no, I thought, my heart sinking. My mind raced at the thought of my precious products being neglected, warped into a messy heap of potentially sticky hair. I knew I needed to keep them safe, to preserve my little corner of joy, but part of me felt like a villain for shutting my friend out from sharing in that joy. Weeks passed. I never let Tara close enough to my bathroom to even know what awaited her behind that perfectly organized door. Jess noticed my retreat into the bathroom, the strange avoidance of discussing products, and the unspoken tension grew. One afternoon, the gentle rain tapped on the window as we lounged on the couch, and Jess innocently broke the silence. "Why don't you like Tara?" After a long silence, I finally admitted the truth. I could feel my voice vibrating with anxiety as I explained everything, my fear, the guilty pleasure of my routine, and how I wanted to protect it from something outside of my control. Jess listened, her expression thoughtful. "It's okay to worry about your things, but you could have trusted me or Tara with it." I hadn't thought of it that way. It was a wake-up call, and even though I felt a weight lift off my chest, I still worried about how to turn around this small mountain of tension. That evening, I decided to take a step toward resolution. I apologized to Jess for hiding my shampoo and asked her to invite Tara to my place and share my routine with her. That night, I found myself pouring the leftover conditioner effortlessly into 2 fun little travel bottles, each adorned with tags from the local craft store. I felt a little silly but undeniably excited. As Jess and Tara cooed over the softness of my hair and products that now graced Tara's curls too, my heart swelled with an unexpected warmth. In that moment, the worry faded and revealed a simple truth: sometimes, sharing your treasures can create a bond far deeper than anything you could have imagined. I learned that night the importance of trust, and the joy that can spring from letting someone in. In time, Tara began to understand the reason behind my initial hesitation and even sought out her own version of expensive hair care, which made us laugh. It turned out the deeper conflict wasn't me being protective of my possessions but rather the challenge of allowing kindness and vulnerability to thrive in the face of anxiety. Update: a few months later, as we were all sprawled in Jess's living room post-movie, Tara casually remarked about how my products had been a game changer for her hair. A shared celebration emerged from that little mention, and in the light of her compliment, I realized my shampoo and conditioner had become a bridge rather than a barrier, strengthening the bond of friendship we had forged together. Just like that. The little pieces of my past no longer felt like possessions to guard, but instead reminders of how precious connections can be when fears are set aside. As the afternoon sun filtered through the sheer curtains of Jess's living room, casting gentle patterns on the floor, I found myself wrapped in a comfort I hadn't anticipated. The remnants of popcorn littered the coffee table, and the warm laughter of my friends mingled with the last fading echoes of the movie we had just finished watching. Jess, ever the host, had arranged an impressive spread of snacks, and the sweet familiarity in the air was both soothing and invigorating. Tara's passing comment about my luxurious shampoo and conditioner stirred something profound within me. I had always viewed my hair products as artifacts of exclusivity, treasures to be safeguarded like fragile relics from a past that felt so foreign now. I'd held so tightly to my fears about sharing them, fears that stemmed from memories of being laughed at for my tastes, or feeling out of place when unable to relate to the more frugal habits of others. Yet, sitting there, watching the joy spread across Tara's face as she spoke about how my products had transformed her hair, I realized that I had unwittingly constructed unnecessary walls around my treasures. Each game changer she recounted served as a testament to the bonds we were building, not just over hair care but over shared experiences and vulnerabilities. The tension in my chest, which once tightened at the thought of my belongings being under someone else's unappreciative gaze, began to dissolve like ice on a warm day. As the conversation flowed and we made plans for our next movie night, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief wash over me. I was gradually learning that sharing a part of myself didn't deplete my identity, instead, it enriched the connection we had cultivated. It inspired me to reflect on my resistance to letting others in. I had spent so long afraid that my belongings might define me in ways I didn't want, when in actuality, they had become a thread in the fabric of our friendship, just like the conversations we shared about dreams, ambitions, and insecurities. In the weeks that followed, I began not only to share my shampoo and conditioner with Tara but also to be more open about my other passions. One evening, while we were sitting on the porch, I showed her my collection of rare vinyl records, each with a story behind it. Tara listened intently, her eyes sparkling with curiosity, and soon we were immersed in discussions about music that led us to swap recommendations and have deep conversations about the feelings that different albums evoked in us. I began to see my unique preferences, whether in hair care or music, as invitations rather than barriers, inviting connections where I might have otherwise been guarded. As these connections blossomed, it became clear that my journey was no longer just about overcoming anxiety, it had transformed into a celebration of shared experiences. My friends often joked about being product prescribers, each confidently recommending their go-to beauty secrets or stylistic tips, and with every laugh and playful criticism, I felt more at home. We even joked about hosting a hair care night where we'd explore different styles while trading our favorite products. It inspired me to create a cozy, safe space where everyone could come together, no longer just around possessions but around an openness to learn and share. Looking back, I realized that my initial instinct to hide my shampoo and conditioner had stemmed from a fear of vulnerability, yet here I was, a few months later, celebrating connections that had formed not in spite of my unique identity but because of it. I had found a community that cherished each other's quirks, welcoming all that made us who we are. This realization settled in my heart like a warm glow, reminding me that sometimes, the things we fear most about sharing are the very things that unlock a deeper understanding within our relationships. So, when Tara reminisced about that fateful day in Jess's living room, it wasn't just a compliment, it was that shared bridge, a memory that would always remind me of the importance of opening my heart and allowing friendship to weave its way into the fabric of my life. And as we all gathered again for those cozy movie nights, my heart swelled with gratitude, for I had learned that the most precious possessions of all are the bonds we cultivate and cherish with those we hold dear. Our evenings together soon became a ritual, a sanctuary filled with laughter, old movies, and the steady ebb and flow of conversation that deepened our friendships. Tara, with her infectious enthusiasm, often took the lead, introducing us to the latest comedies or nostalgic flicks from the 90s. Each time we settled in on the couch, popcorn in hand, I couldn't help but reflect on how much had changed since I first met them. The little insecurities I had once clung to, my fear of losing my prized hair products or the jealousy I felt when Tara first used them, had transformed into a comfort, a reminder that vulnerability could be the cornerstone of connection. There was something about seeing Tara effortlessly toss her hair over her shoulder, the glossy shine catching the light like a beautifully woven thread connecting us all. One evening, after binge-watching a series, the topic shifted to future plans, dreams and aspirations, the kind that often linger in the quiet corners of our minds. Tara spoke of her ambition to start a blog about beauty and self-care, a project that had been simmering just beneath the surface. As she spoke, I felt a bubbling sense of pride for her, tinged with a familiar pull of envy. It seemed so effortless for her, proclaiming her passion to the world, while I'd always been apprehensive about sharing my own nuances with others. It was then that I remembered the first day she had borrowed my shampoo, the piano line of laughter spilling from her lips when I first revealed my stash, the way she had touched each bottle with reverence, as if holding a gem. After a thoughtful pause, I decided to share, a leap of faith that surprised even me. I opened up about my trepidation towards vulnerability and how I had kept my products hidden, all of it transforming into an opportunity to encourage her ambition. Tara listened, her expression shifting from curiosity to understanding, and as she did, Jess chimed in, sharing her own struggles with self-doubt. There was a flicker of realization in the air, an unspoken bond that connected the three of us through shared fears and expectations. For that brief moment, it felt as if I was peeling back the layers of a protective shell, bearing parts of myself that had long been closed off. As our conversation became more heartfelt, laughter mingling with a shared sense of vulnerability, I felt the weight of my earlier insecurities lift. It was a relief to acknowledge that we all had our ups and downs, insecurities and aspirations alike, and our friendship had become a safe space where we could lay it all bare. On that night, we forged a pact to not only support each other in achieving our dreams but also to celebrate our failures as part of this imperfect, beautiful tapestry we were weaving together. Weeks rolled into months, and soon Tara launched her blog, drawing from every laugh, every tear, and every awkward moment we had shared as friends. I watched her thrive, and with each updated post she published, I felt a part of that journey. She was my friend, and in her success, I celebrated my own triumph over my fears. That bond we formed wasn't just about my shampoo, it was a reflection of understanding, trust, and the beautiful messiness of life. In the quiet hours of the night, as I lay beneath the comforting weight of my blankets, I often found myself smiling, recalling the beginning of this incredible journey. The threads woven through friendship had become the very fabric of my existence, reminding me that every data point of insecurity dissolved in the glow of genuine connections. The profound lesson I learned, encased in the simplicity of shared moments over popcorn and laughter, was that authenticity in relationships can turn even our smallest concerns into a celebration of vulnerability, crafting a life that's rich not in possessions, but deep in love and understanding. And every time I reached for my bottles of shampoo and conditioner, I smiled, knowing they now served not just a personal ritual, but a reminder of the friendships I cherished and the bridges we had built together. Confession, I paid my way through college coursework, and now I'm going to graduate with a degree that I did not earn, but rather bought piece by piece. I know how it sounds, flippant, irresponsible, but let me explain before you judge. It all began in my sophomore year when the pressure of maintaining my scholarships while balancing a part-time job became almost unbearable. I was overwhelmed, drowning in courses that felt designed to torment rather than educate. My friends were either excelling effortlessly or struggling gloriously, and I found myself in a dark space of melancholy detachment. One evening, after a particularly intense round of studying that included multiple energy drinks and little sleep, I stumbled upon an online community that offered a service, purchasing coursework and final exams outright. The first transaction felt like a slippery slope, the kind that promises a temporary fix for long-term consequences. Justifying that act of desperation became easy. After all, wouldn't I be earning the degree by paying towards my future? I convinced myself that everyone was cheating in one form or another, they just didn't have the boldness to embrace it quite like I did. As each semester passed, I found myself sinking deeper into a quicksand of deception, carefully crafting excuses for my absence from study sessions and over-exaggerating my partial understanding of the subjects. My friends often praised me for my dedicated work ethic, and although their words would sting momentarily with guilt, I brushed them aside, whispering to myself that I was only finding a shortcut to a frustrating destination. But there lay the essence of my conflict. There were moments, late at night, when the weight of my choices pressed down like a seal, prompting haunting questions. Was I a fraud? Would I deserve to step on the stage come graduation? I could already hear my family cheering, my mother's proud smile lighting up the auditorium, unaware of the disingenuous piece of paper I was holding onto so tightly. Everything kept shifting and fracturing within me like glass breaking silently in a forgotten corner, beautiful yet destructive. As graduation approached, the ache of my concealment gnawed beneath my skin. I was a ticking time bomb, a secret kept far too long, and it felt like the walls were closing in, threatening to expose me at any moment. Then, one day while lurching through the cafeteria, a friend pulled me aside. She had suspected something was amiss, and the look on her face struck a match to my carefully constructed facade. Confessing to her felt like actually letting the air out of a balloon. Her response was one I hadn't anticipated. Rather than anger, she offered empathy, admitting that the academic landscape often forced students into corners they had to navigate through dodgy strategies like mine. That moment shifted everything for me. It wasn't about whether what I had done was right or wrong, but rather about understanding the depth of the pressure we all faced. As graduation day arrived, I stood among my fellow students, donning my cap and gown, feeling simultaneously high on adrenaline and low with self-doubt. And when my name was called, I felt something shatter in me, the part that thought I could outsmart the world. I walked across that stage, a degree in hand, yes, one bought with a hefty price tag rather than blood, sweat, and tears. The applause echoed around me like distant thunder, and in that moment, I realized I had betrayed my journey, but as I met my family's expectations, the simple joy of their pride began to override the complexity of my feelings. Afterward, I stepped outside, almost dazed by the weightiness of it all, when a thought flared to life in my mind. This was just the beginning. I knew I couldn't keep running from the truth forever. It was time for some honesty. Perhaps I would share my clandestine story in a more private setting, with those who really mattered, and in that telling, I would find healing. I couldn't change the past, but I could redefine my future. Maybe my experience would even serve as a lesson on authenticity, connection, and the very real pressures of society. Update: several months later, I did reach out to my friend who had supported me back at graduation, along with a few close acquaintances. Over coffee, I laid everything bare, and to my surprise, they responded not with judgment but rather with understanding. It sparked conversations about our experiences and the struggles many face in our generation regarding societal expectations and the pressure to succeed at any cost. Writing this out, sharing my truth, it felt liberating, and together we began to create a group focusing on academic honesty and support, helping others navigate their own paths with integrity. Now, as I look toward the future, I hold my degree not just as a symbol of achievement, but as a reminder that it's not always the path we take that defines us, but the honesty we must eventually embrace along the way. I can still visualize that summer afternoon when my friends and I held our first meeting. Inside the small campus coffee shop, sunlight poured in through the big windows, illuminating our makeshift meeting space, which consisted of mismatched chairs and tables pushed together. The aroma of roasted beans filled the air, creating a sense of warmth, much like the conversations we began to share. In one corner, I could see Sarah, nervously twirling her hair, finally breaking her silence to share her own struggles, how she felt the weight of her family's expectations resting heavily on her shoulders. It was a familiar feeling. I had been there, too, buried under pressure and guilt, trying to juggle classes, a part-time job, and an insatiable desire to please everyone around me. Our little group blossomed into a safe haven, where confessions were freely exchanged like whispers of wind passing through the trees. Before long, we were venturing beyond just our academic honesty initiative. We organized events that fostered a sense of community, bringing together individuals who felt overwhelmed and out of place in the finicky world of higher education. We laughed more than I ever thought possible, exchanging stories of late-night study sessions fueled by caffeine and the ridiculousness of your classic imposter syndrome. There was something profound about vulnerability. When you openly admit your flaws and fears to others, it transforms those burdens into shared experiences, which somehow lightens the load. I started attending workshops on ethics and academic integrity, learning more about the real impact of decisions I used to brush aside. There was a powerful moment during one of those discussions when I finally understood the gravity of my actions. I stood there, listening to another student practically in tears, talking about how he felt he was not worthy of being in college because he struggled to keep up, how he had resorted to cheating just to stay afloat. I felt guilty, a wave of remorse washing over me, and I wondered how many people like him had slipped through the cracks, feeling alone in their academic journey. It prompted me to speak openly about my own choices, to share the truth that had slowly unraveled my conscience. As I spoke, I saw the surprise mingled with relief in the eyes of those around me. It was as if I had peeled back the layers of shame that had wrapped tightly around us all. This cathartic release sparked discussions about what it truly means to earn your education and how, at the heart of it, is the understanding that everyone is fighting their own battles in silence. The irony was not lost on me. While I had paid my way through college, the real education came from facing my fears and flaws head-on. As the semester drew to a close, I prepared for graduation, standing in front of the mirror, my cap and gown draping elegantly over the shoulders of someone who had finally found a measure of peace. My heart, once heavy with deceit, was now lightened by compassion and understanding, not just for myself, but for the countless faces I had come to know and love through our group. As I received my diploma, I didn't just see the degree. Instead, I perceived it as a token of survival, a reminder of how far I've come. In that moment, it was evident that integrity mattered far more than mere achievements on paper. I left the auditorium, my heart buoyant, my soul ready to forge a new path, one constructed on the foundation of honesty and camaraderie. I was stepping into the world, prepared not just to be a graduate but to advocate for others, to encourage them that honesty isn't just a buzzword but a guiding principle. And under the stars that night, sharing laughter with friends who had become family, I felt a profound sense of belonging, a richness of experience that far surpassed any degree. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I embraced the knowledge that while I may have struggled, I was now equipped with the tools to help others navigate their own intricate labyrinths. Reflecting back, I realized that my so-called failure became my greatest privilege, an opportunity to redefine success on my own terms and perhaps sow the seeds of authenticity in the lives of others around me. With that warm feeling of belonging wrapping around me like a blanket, I couldn't help but reflect on how far I've come. The journey from a hollow accomplishment to a deeply personal understanding of integrity had changed the contours of my life in ways I had never anticipated. As the conversation turned to lighter topics and our laughter echoed into the night, I felt a sense of purpose wash over me. This was more than just a graduation party, it was a celebration of truth and acceptance. There's something about being on the brink of a new chapter that fills you with excitement, yet also with a slight twinge of anxiety. Yes, I was graduating, but this meant stepping into a world outside the university's protective walls, where the complexities of adulthood would lay themselves bare. That summer, my friends and I busied ourselves with dreams and practicalities, each of us contemplating what lay ahead. I found solace in writing, each word pouring onto the page as a cathartic release. I chronicled my experiences, not just out of a desire to express myself, but with the hope of crafting a guide that could resonate with others who faced similar dilemmas, the pressure to succeed, the fears of inadequacy, and the daunting shadows of society's expectations. I spent evenings sipping coffee in cozy cafes, hazy lamplight illuminating the pages of my journal as I poured my thoughts onto paper, detailing not just my journey but also the voices of fellow students I had spoken with about their own struggles. In doing so, I connected with those who had grappled with cheating, anxiety, or the fear of disappointing their families. It was through these candid stories that I started to see a pattern. Many of us felt lost in a sea of comparison, our worth often tethered to numerical grades and hollow accolades. I realized that my own story had the potential to shed light on the darker corners of academic life that weren't often highlighted. Instead of seeking validation through a conventional path, I began to embrace the idea that each one of us has our own unique narrative that adds depth to the collective experience. As the season turned, and graduation approached, I stood at the threshold of not just a ceremony but a pivotal moment of self-discovery. With my friends rallying around me, we decided to establish a real space on campus for honest dialogue, an initiative to create a safe haven for students struggling with the weight of unreal expectations. We entitled it Unwritten Paths, a name that encapsulated the myriad ways we could navigate life with integrity, well-being, and authenticity. Each week, students would gather to share their stories, brainstorm ideas, and offer support, knowing that they were part of a community that championed personal truths over societal pressures. Finally, graduation day arrived, a technicolor whirlwind of pride, nerves, and overwhelming emotion. Standing in line, clad in my cap and gown, I felt every heartbeat echoing my anticipation. When they called my name, I stepped forward, my friends cheering wildly from the sidelines. As I held the diploma in my hands, I wasn't just thinking about the hours of study, the sleepless nights, or the money spent. Instead, I felt an overwhelming gratitude for the lessons learned along the way. Those lessons had come not just from textbooks and lectures but from grappling with my sincerity and, in turn, learning to embrace the authenticity of others. As I scanned the crowd, I found my closest friends, people who understood me, who celebrated me not for my grades, but for my journey, and my heart swelled with joy. We gathered later, recounting the day's events, our laughter bright against the evening sky. In that moment, I recognized something profound. While the future felt as uncharted as a blank page, I was ready to tackle it with an open heart, armed with empathy and resilience. And then, as if life had its own script, I received a message from my old college professor, the one who had challenged me to think beyond the traditional definitions of success. He invited me to share my journey and the impact of our community initiative at an upcoming panel on academic integrity. Nervously, I accepted. It felt surreal to think that my story could inspire a broader conversation. As I prepared to step into a space surrounded by academics and thought leaders, I took a moment to breathe and center myself, reflecting on the days of fear and self-doubt, knowing full well that I was embarking on yet another chapter, one where I could truly weave my experiences into a narrative that might change someone's life for the better. In sharing my voice, in being open about my flaws and triumphs, I was no longer just someone who paid her way through college. I was a living testament to the power of transformation, honesty, and compassion. With every word I spoke, I hoped to inspire others not to hide behind their carefully constructed facades but to embrace their journeys, however messy or unconventional they might be. As I continued to navigate my path in this dynamic world, I realized that the degree I hadn't truly earned was merely a stepping stone towards something far more significant, a shared vision for a future where integrity and authenticity reign supreme. I have this recurring dream, the kind that stays with you long after you wake up, lingering at the edges of your consciousness like a familiar fog. In it, I'm back in my small apartment, the walls adorned with mismatched memorabilia from my childhood, and the glow of the television casts soft shadows across the clutter. I'd curled up on the couch, a spirited mixture of pillows and warm blankets, with the familiar theme song of my absolute comfort show echoing in my ears. If there's anything uniting my college friends and me over the years, it's the series we could watch a million times and never tire of, That Cozy Life. It's a quirky sitcom about a group of friends maneuvering through life's ups and downs, with quirky plots that always ended in heartwarming moments and the kind of humor that felt like a hug. One evening, while taking a break from my work, I decided to indulge in a binge-watch session. I reached the episode where one of the characters, Elizabeth, confronts her insecurities when her childhood friend returns to town with a life that seems so picture-perfect. As the weight of her feelings washed over her, I felt a pang of recognition ripple through me. It was subtle yet profound, an uninvited reminder of the mounting pressure I felt about my own life choices. You see, I graduated with a degree in literature a year prior, but while my friends soared into burgeoning careers, I found myself working part-time at a local bookstore, surrounded by the musty scent of old pages while my dreams remained wedged between the spines of books I longed to write. I began to question everything, feeling much like my on-screen counterpart caught in a storm of self-doubt, waiting for that breakthrough moment. It was during this time that I reconnected with Mia, my childhood best friend who had left our sleepy town to conquer the big city. In a flurry of excited messages, we agreed to meet up, and I desperately hoped she would bring with her the kind of ambition that once inspired me. When we finally met, we sat in our favorite cafe, the smell of fresh coffee enveloping us as we reminisced about those blissful days of youth that seemed so simplistic in retrospect. Yet as she spoke about her fast-paced life filled with exciting opportunities and endless networking, I could feel my own insecurities rising like a tide. Her sizable success felt intimidating, and my aspirations felt small and silly, as if I'd pitifully missed the memo on how to transform dreams into reality. The hours melted away, but my feelings of inadequacy only deepened. It was then that the memory of That Cozy Life flickered back into my mind, specifically its ability to weave lessons into its lighthearted fabric. I could almost hear Elizabeth's voice saying that success wasn't just a straight path but a winding road filled with bumps and detours, better shared with friends who understood your journey. Finding comfort in this thought, I invited Mia to watch an episode with me, hoping it would create a moment of connection, even in our divergent paths. Surprisingly, she agreed. We laughed until our sides hurt while watching Elizabeth's comedic misadventures and heart-forward journey. When the finale credits rolled, I shared with Mia how the show had always been my safe haven, a means to escape whenever I felt overwhelmed by the real world. In return, she opened up about her struggles with feeling lonely despite her successes, revealing that behind the glimmering facade, she often craved the depth of true connection, something our bond once provided effortlessly. It felt liberating, sharing our vulnerabilities, almost like we were both characters in an episode, two old friends who wandered off script only to find their way back together. By the dusk of that evening, the weight of the world felt lighter, the connection we re-established was profound yet simple. Little did I know that this reconciliation would serve as the catalyst for my journey toward embracing my dreams without the harsh lens of comparison. The days turned into weeks as I found solace in rewatching my beloved series whenever I felt the pressures of adult life creeping up again, allowing those comforting episodes to remind me of the importance of my own narrative. As the months rolled by, I slowly began to pen my own stories, starting with daily snippets inspired by moments observed at the bookstore, drawings from our cafe escapades, and the laughter shared in those newly forged memories. Just the other night, I received a message from Mia that made my heart flutter. She relayed how she'd been watching That Cozy Life too, and found every episode echoing her doubts and aspirations, much like mine. With a burst of excitement and courage, I told her about my new writing project and asked if she'd consider being a beta reader. With her enthusiastic response, I realized the comfort show that warmed our hearts had woven its lessons tightly into our lives, allowing us to share paths filled with uncertainty but also ignited by mutual support and understanding. Life may not be a neatly wrapped sitcom, but as we both learned, it can be just as beautiful to find warmth in familiar ties. I figured sharing my journey on a Reddit thread could lead to further connections and reflections, so I posted under Confessions, hoping to find others who felt similarly. The supportive feedback rolled in, weaving a new network of friendships across the digital expanse. The Comfort Show had not only offered me solace but introduced me to a community that mirrored the support I truly needed. In retrospect, I realized that while we may never achieve the perfection portrayed on screen, embracing our flawed but vibrant stories transforms mere comfort into genuine courage. The cozy moments tend to hold the most strength, don't they? After all, life is a series of episodes, each rich in its small imperfections and lessons, echoing through laughter and connection. What more could one ask for in the grand script of our lives? As I settled back into my usual routine, I found myself reflecting on the warmth the show had brought into my life, a warmth that seemed to resonate long after the closing credits rolled. I remember binge-watching the series late at night, the glow from the screen wrapping around me like an old, comforting blanket. But it wasn't just the storyline that captivated me, it was the profound sense of understanding I felt from the characters who faced their own struggles, triumphs, and moments of vulnerability. They became friends I never met, existing in a world where flaws were celebrated rather than hidden. Each time I started another rewatch, the familiar dialogue and laughter flowed through my apartment as if it had seeped into every corner, transforming my space into a sanctuary away from the chaos outside. I began sharing my experience with this series on an online forum, weaving together the intricate details of my own life with those of the characters. I reminisced about how the protagonist, with their struggles to find balance between work and relationships, echoed my own internal battles. When I pressed send on my post, I felt a sense of dread, waiting for either silence or criticism, but instead, my inbox flooded with sympathetic messages and stories from others who felt the same. Each interaction became a moment of connection, reminding me that we are all spinning in our own orbits yet inevitably drawn to one another, like planets in a grand cosmic dance. But it was during one late-night reply to a fellow user, their story similar to mine, their struggles palpable, that a twist emerged. They shared how this comfort show had inadvertently helped them cope with their own mental health issues, and it struck a chord in me. I thought of the nights I had sat paralyzed by anxiety, the series lightening my heavy heart, and suddenly felt compelled to give back in some small way. I began organizing virtual watch parties, inviting all those who had reached out, creating a space where we could engage over our shared love for the show. The first gathering felt electric. I could almost hear the pulse of the collective as laughter erupted with every punchline and nostalgic moment. We traveled through our favorite episodes together, voices overlapping in a joyful cacophony of commentary, and in those moments, something remarkable happened. I felt a shift. The heaviness that had lingered in my chest for months began to slip away, replaced by the buoyancy of new friendships forged in the glow of our beloved series. Each gathering deepened our connections, unraveling layers of vulnerability, humor, and warmth, and we soon found ourselves discussing everything from life dreams to fears, so intimate and real it felt surreal. But as the weeks passed and winter settled in outside my window, I noticed one of the participants, Jamie, grew quiet. Their laughter had once been infectious, but during our last meeting, it felt distant, as if a shadow had fallen over their spirit. Concerned, I reached out privately, checking in and sharing my worry. It wasn't long before Jamie replied, spilling their heart out in a series of messages. They spoke of feeling lost, adrift in a world that seemed increasingly isolating, weighed down by expectations, and how the solace they found in our gatherings had begun to feel like a highlight against the drudgeries of life. Suddenly, I realized I wasn't just the spectator of my show anymore, I was an active participant in someone else's story. I suggested we have a one-on-one call where we could talk openly, just the two of us. That night, as we spoke, a vulnerability emerged, raw and beautiful. Jamie shared their dreams of pursuing art, their struggles with rejection, and their longing for connection. I listened intently, offering encouragement and sharing my own fears of inadequacy, and as the conversation flowed, it felt like we were crafting our own narrative, one of resilience and hope. Days turned into weeks, and Jamie and I became inseparable during our virtual meetups. With each discussion, we stretched out our dreams and uncertainties like threads, weaving them into something new and vibrant. Inspired by our dynamic, we decided to host a live episode commentary on our favorite parts, creating a new series of posts for those in the community to join us. It was a success. The chatrooms lit up with excitement, the joy felt like fireworks bursting across a darkened sky. In the end, Jamie and I both realized something profound, that our comfort show, while cherished, was never truly the star of the universe, it was the friendships born from it that shone the brightest. Reflecting on this journey, I smiled, knowing that sometimes the most transformative moments come not from the escapism of a favorite episode, but from the connections we foster while embracing our imperfections with courage. Life, after all, had become its own blend of sitcom unpredictability and heartfelt emotional depth, and I was more than ready for the next season to begin. Even amid the uncertainty, I knew, as the credits rolled on this chapter of our story, there was always room for another laugh, another episode, and another friend. I could hardly wait to see what came next, ready to watch the unfolding tapestry of our lives together, the comfort show continuing to inspire us in ways we were only just beginning to understand. In the days that followed, the haze of uncertainty began to lift. I found myself immersed in the online community crafted around our beloved comfort show. Late-night discussions bubbled with animated spontaneity and earnest reflections, while the threads of personal anecdotes intertwined with favorite scenes and shared quotes, forming a tapestry of camaraderie both sweet and reassuring. It was a safe haven. During one particularly quiet evening, I curled up on my couch wearing my favorite oversized sweatshirt, the glow of my laptop illuminating my excitedly furrowed brows. I opened a thread titled Life Lessons from My Comfort Show, and the posts poured in, mirroring our myriad experiences through our shared lens. I read about someone who had lost their job but found the courage to chase their dream of starting a bakery, channeling the spirit of the quirky character we all loved who had redefined failure into a zesty journey of personal reinvention. I smiled at the words of another, who had battled anxiety by replicating the show's unpredictable bravery through small, conscious steps in their daily life. It was like witnessing a series of life scripts intertwining with our favorite sitcom moments, each anecdote brimming with vulnerability and hope. As I watched the clock slide past midnight, a sense of anticipation electrified the air, urging me to take the plunge. A post began forming in my mind, a confession of sorts, combining my personal struggles and an honest tribute to the influence the show had had on my life. With deliberate movements, I started typing. I wrote about how comforting it was to have my own version of that friend from the show who nudged me to embrace spontaneity, urging me to venture out into life rather than waiting for it to come to me. I unconsciously penned down how the catchphrases hovering in our lexicon had shifted from being mere jokes to becoming mantras I whispered to myself during panic-stricken moments. Each sentence flowed easily, my fears spilling out in delicate bursts of honesty. The screen glowed brightly as I finally typed, "In a world painted with anxiety and uncertainties, I find solace in our shared laughter, the connection through flawed characters who echo my own story. Sometimes, I dare to hope I can embody their courage, even if just a little." Once posted, I didn't expect much, anticipating the regular ebb and flow of online life. Yet, within hours, my notifications began to light up like a festival of digital camaraderie. People were sharing their own reflections, building this comforting bridge between their narratives and mine. I found sort of a strange magic in the shared vulnerabilities, the strengths and weaknesses in our piece of the comfort show's vast landscape. Every reply added a new glimmer of hope, a ripple of joy punctuated with laughter. One response, in particular, caught my eye, a message from someone named Jamie, who relayed how they had started their own podcast to discuss similar themes, referencing an episode that mirrored my confession. They wrote, "Let's collaborate. It feels like our stories could guide one another." I realized then that sometimes, behind a computer screen, extraordinary connections form from the simplest of words. As weeks turned into months, Jamie and I began our collaboration, diving deep into the themes interwoven in our lives and our comfort show. We created a small but passionate audience who resonated with our stories of awkwardness, courage, love, and friendship. The podcast blossomed, allowing both of us to explore our thoughts and feelings publicly yet intimately, as if we were peeling back the layers of vulnerability together, like two characters in our very own heartwarming episode. With each new recording session, I could feel my initial hesitations melt away, replaced by an eagerness to share my voice, to really continue unearthing our collective humanity. I often reflected on this new dynamic, how our lives, much like our comfort show, contained humor and depth, a balance that felt both comforting and exhilarating to explore. Every new guest we interviewed infused our conversations with fresh perspectives, spiraling us into meaningful discussions that bubbled with joy and authenticity. But more importantly, they served as gentle reminders of the quirks that make our stories uniquely ours. And then there came a day unlike any other, where our podcast reached a significant milestone, our 100th episode. It felt surreal, almost unreal, celebrating an anniversary where each part of our journey was woven through the echoes of laughter, inspiration, and healing. That night, as Jamie and I recorded, there was an electricity in the air, a blend of nervous energy and vibrant hope. I spoke a little deeper that time, relaying to our listeners how we began this journey amid uncertainties and doubts, drawing strength from the comfort show that had first inspired me to be braver than I felt. Sitting in that small recording room, surrounded by all the memories we had accumulated thus far, moments where we forged our friendship, advocated for one another, and crafted honest discussions that opened our hearts, I knew this was more than just a podcast. It was a living, breathing testament to the connections we forge when we step into the light of vulnerability. As I signed off that night, a comforting thought echoed in my mind: no matter what the next season holds, I have found my rhythm in this episodic journey called life, hand in hand with newfound friends echoing the lessons of our beloved characters. I drifted to sleep that night filled with a warm sense of purpose, ready for whatever came next, ready to embrace it all without fear, knowing that each chapter was merely a beautiful interplay of shared experiences and laughter, another episode in the vast melodrama of our imperfect existence. And this was simply the beginning. I spent most of my life firmly believing in the power of the little plastic bottle that sat atop my bathroom sink, an unassuming thing, really, but the promise it held was monumental. It was a miracle serum, or so the infomercials claimed, and for nearly 20 years, I swore by its supposed ability to rid my skin of every blemish, flake, and imperfection. I remember being a teenager, scrolling through forum posts late at night, reading incredible testimonials about how this product transformed lives. It was called Radiance Essence, and the blue and gold labeling seduced me with the idea of beauty, allure, and confidence. Over the years, I had fallen into quite a ritual. I'd wash my face with my favorite soap, pat it dry, and then gently massage the serum into my skin. Each application felt like a small act of self-love, believing fully that I was preemptively thwarting acne and any signs of aging. Fast forward to just a few weeks ago, when I found myself scrolling through a thread titled "What is a product that you swore by your whole life, but have only recently learned that it's essentially just snake oil?" I hesitated at first, but curiosity pulled me in. I started reading the comments, each revealing personal tales of heartache and embarrassing discoveries, as users detailed their own revelations about miracle cures that turned out to be little more than lies cleverly wrapped in shiny packages. One comment stood out starkly: "Dear God, Radiance Essence is just scented water." My heart sank as I read about someone else's life-changing epiphany, feeling as if a gut punch had toppled my entire belief system. For a moment, I sat in silence, replaying memories of all the times I'd turned to that bottle in joy and despair, when all I had really been doing was splashing water on my face. A gnawing unease began to settle in, a mix of embarrassment and disbelief. I remembered vividly those times when my friends would compliment my skin, and I'd credit my radiant glow to the serum. Suddenly, those moments felt hollow, tainted by what I was now beginning to fathom: was I living a lie? The next morning, spurred by an insatiable need for answers, I pored over product ingredients and reviews, plunging into a whirlpool of information that made my head spin. The more I uncovered, the more I felt deceived: dates of patent expirations, lawsuits against false claims, customer service representatives claiming it was discontinued for formulation improvements, all signs pointing to the truth I hadn't been ready to face. The weight of realization pressed heavily on my chest. How could I have been so naive? Reluctantly, I canceled my monthly subscription, stared at the lonely vial that had been a constant presence, and placed it in a drawer, further distancing myself from what once brought me comfort. Still, in the quiet recesses of my mind, I felt a lost connection to those moments of misguided faith that had seemed to carry so much significance. It wasn't just about skincare, It was the coping mechanism in an unpredictable world, the reliable promise of a little self-improvement. I spent the next few days in reflection, exploring what beauty truly meant to me, without external validation or the dependability of a product. I began taking long walks, reveling in the gentle caress of the wind against my skin, committing to nourishing my body from within by drinking more water, eating wholesome foods, and practicing gratitude for what I had. As the weeks flowed smoothly past like a gentle river, I noticed a shift in my perception not only of myself but also of the world around me. I began to see beauty in simplicity, a smile from a stranger, the colors of sunset streaking the sky, the fleeting joys of each new day. I found a community of people who, too, had awakened to the idea that beauty rituals come in many forms, and that self-love went beyond the confines of a bottle. In sharing my experience, I discovered many felt the same. Many had been struck by the realization of placing too much faith in superficial enhancements and were now embracing their authentic selves. In that exchange, I felt a relief wash over me, a sense of solidarity. My vulnerability had woven a new thread in the fabric of my life's journey, and I began to appreciate the skin I was in, blemishes and all. As I closed the chapter on my reliance on radiance essence, I felt free, able to define beauty on my own terms, which felt, in many ways, far richer than anything that could be bought in a bottle. Several weeks later, I decided to revisit the thread that had triggered this incredible transformation. Scrolling through the responses again, I felt a sense of gratitude for the moment of clarity I had received. Tucked away amongst the confessions was an update from the original poster. It's wild how many of us are waking up to the truth of our perceived flaws. I started a support group for skin positivity. Inspiration washed over me, and with a deep, calm breath, I felt inclined to share my story, offering not just my confession but also a glimpse of hope to anyone still held captive by their expectations. I submitted my thoughts with a smile, grateful for a community that had propelled me into rediscovering myself. As I hit send, I understood that true radiance was found not in a bottle, but in the acceptance of our own beautifully imperfect selves. As I release my thoughts into the void of cyberspace, a wave of relief washes over me, like stepping out into sunlight after being trapped in shadow for too long. In that moment, it felt as if the weight of years spent hiding behind the veneer of flawless skin was finally lifting. I had spent so much of my life obsessed with concealers, serums, and exfoliants, believing that each product was a step towards some unattainable ideal, some version of myself that others would deem worthy. But the idea that I could simply shed those expectations, that I could unfold my story and share it with others, filled me with a kind of warmth I hadn't felt in ages. With each day, I found that I was embracing my natural texture, the small scars from teenage battles, the laugh lines etched into my face with joy over the years. They were all markers of my journey, not imperfections to hide. As days turned into weeks, I kept returning to that online forum, and with each post I read, I felt more connected to the stories of others who had also donned the mask society had pressed upon us. One member, Tara, shared her experiences with severe acne throughout high school, how she would meticulously cover her skin in thick layers of makeup that often made things worse rather than better. Reading her words struck a chord, echoing my own past struggles. It was reassuring to know that I wasn't alone in this. We messaged back and forth, and soon we were part of a small group that would meet virtually every weekend. Each call was filled with laughter, sharing anecdotes about the ridiculous things we used to believe, the products that failed to deliver on their promises, and the crazy lengths we went to in pursuit of that elusive perfect skin. As much as I cherished these connections, one Friday evening, I found myself grappling with a sudden bout of anxiety. I had been invited to a friend's birthday party, an event that would surely feature ample photographs and the inevitable aspect of being scrutinized by those playful fingers ready to brandish their phones. I had not fully surrendered my fear of judgment. As I prepared for the party, staring in the mirror, the familiar tug at my self-assurance emerged. My reflection seemed to scream at me, urging me to conform, to cover up what I had ownership over only weeks prior. But then I remembered the mantra I had stumbled upon in our group: your worth is not determined by your skin. The phrase resonated with me. I let my gaze soften, recognizing the contours of my face, the little dimples and freckles that I had once deemed flaws. With a deep breath, I decided I wouldn't apply anything more than my light moisturizer. Instead, I opted for a dash of mascara and a swipe of lip gloss to hint at the vibrant person beneath the careful layers I had worn for so long. At the party, the first few moments felt like an eternity, a tightrope walk between the comfortable and the vulnerable. My pulse quickened as I navigated through the gathering, but then something surprising happened. I found joy bubbling within me, laughing and sharing stories, feeling an ease in being simply present without the expectation of a flawless facade. When a friend asked to take a candid photo of our ridiculous dance moves, I instinctively fell into place, muscles relaxing as I realized I was no longer shackled by the need to appear perfect. Afterward, scrolling through the photos, I felt a bittersweet pang of nostalgia for that person I used to be, lost among the mirrored reflections and idealized images. Yet, as I examined my own image, bare and real, I saw not just imperfections but life, vibrancy, and authenticity, a celebration of who I was, an unfiltered moment among friends. That night, I posted one of those photos on my feed, accompanied by a heartfelt caption about embracing our true selves and the beauty of vulnerability. The response surprised me. Comments poured in, expressing admiration, sharing their own struggles, and supporting my newfound stance against unrealistic beauty standards. It felt as if my story resonated beyond outlines of skin and into deeper connections of understanding and care. Encouraged, I kept sharing my journey, my learning, my mishaps, and the small victories I celebrated. It wasn't just about my skin anymore, it became a movement of sorts, one where we all stood unified in our imperfections, refusing the dictation of what beauty should be. Reflecting back on the origins of my journey, I felt a sense of pride to have transformed what once held me captive into a beacon of hope for others. As I stand here, full circle and radiant in my own way, I realize that rediscovering oneself is an ongoing journey, one where each wave of self-acceptance washes away the remnants of past insecurities. And while I still have days of doubt, they do not define me. What carries me forward is the community we've built together, a tapestry of imperfections woven into something beautiful, accompanied by the unwavering belief that true radiance is born from love, love for ourselves, our stories, and every scar that has shaped who we are. Update: I've gone on to lead a series of local workshops on self-acceptance, and much to my delight, I have connected through these events with even more incredible people, each of whom has contributed to this beautiful circle of empowerment. We've recently started a project to create a zine that collects our stories, a testament that we can turn our struggles into art and connection. I'm excited for what the future holds and grateful for all the paths that have converged to lead me to this moment. Every day, I keep reminding myself, our stories matter, and in sharing them, we gift others the courage to embrace their own journey. As I sat in my cozy nook, surrounded by the soft glow of fairy lights and the comforting scent of lavender candles, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace wash over me. It was in this space where I often found solace, a retreat from the chaos of the world, where I could reflect on my journey and the transformative power of vulnerability. The zine project was now well underway, and every meeting with the group filled me with purpose, each member adding their unique voice into the tapestry we were weaving. I remembered our first gathering, how tentative we all were, exchanging nervous glances as we shared our stories of hurt and self-doubt. I had spoken about my long-term relationship with the so-called miracle cream I had religiously applied since my teenage years, convinced it would one day bring me the flawless skin I had always coveted. The room had filled with laughter and knowing nods when one brave soul shared her own tale of a $30 jar of liquid confidence, which had only caused breakouts and added to her insecurities rather than erasing them. Each shared experience was like peeling back layers of skin. We laid bare our raw emotions, exposing the scars left by the beauty industry's tall tales. With every story, we found connection, laughter, and healing, understanding we were not alone in our struggles. After a few months, when the first draft of our zine was completed, I felt a flutter of excitement deep in my chest. We had decided to host a small launch party at a local cafe, where we would not only unveil our work but also celebrate our collective empowerment. As the day approached, the air buzzed with anticipation. I could already picture the small crowd of supportive friends, family, and even a few local journalists who had expressed interest in our project. With our contributions in hand, we prepared to share our journeys not just as isolated individuals but as a unified chorus echoing the message of self-acceptance. And so, the day finally arrived, clear skies overhead, and the cafe transformed into a vibrant sanctuary of our stories. People mingled, sipping lavender lemonades and munching on tiny pastries adorned with edible flowers as I set up our makeshift display in the corner. My heart raced, but it also danced with joy to see the enthusiasm in my friends' eyes. As the moment approached, we gathered everyone's attention, our nerves giving way to exhilaration. One by one, we read excerpts from our zine, sharing not only our struggles but also the lessons we had learned along the way. Each word met with applause, and I could see tears and smiles exchanged throughout the audience, a visceral reminder of the power of our truths. I felt a profound connection that night, where the journey was not about selling a solution but about embracing our imperfections. We ended the night with an open mic, inviting others to share their stories, our circle expanding to include new voices in need of a platform. As I stepped away from the cafe, the air kissed my skin, and I felt lighter than I had in years. I had come to terms with my past obsession with beauty products that never delivered, but somehow, I had transitioned that pain into a pathway for healing, not just for myself but for others too. With a sense of fulfillment growing inside of me, I decided to launch a monthly podcast that would allow even more people to share their journeys. I envisioned deep conversations, laughter, and moments of vulnerability where we could all learn from each other's experiences. And in the stillness of that tranquil evening, I found the clarity I had long sought after. My skin was not my identity, nor were those facades I once believed would validate me. No, my identity was carved through my stories of resilience, compassion, and love. As the stars twinkled above, I made a silent promise to myself to continue creating a space where the beautiful tapestry of our imperfect lives could shine bright, illuminating the path for others still navigating their own tumultuous journeys. I felt gratitude swell in my chest. We are meant to be seen, heard, and loved for who we are, every flawless and flawed moment in between. This was just the beginning. It started like any other weekend in my cozy apartment, sunlight streaming in through the living room window, casting soft shadows on the walls adorned with my paintings. I'd spent most of the week in my studio, experimenting with colors and textures, lost in a world of creativity that often felt like my only refuge. Art had always been my passion, and with each brushstroke, I poured my heart into every canvas, treating each piece as a personal expression of my inner landscape. My boyfriend, Henry, often remarked how he admired my talent, but I could tell there was a part of him that didn't quite understand the depths of my connection to my work. Whenever he'd come over, he'd inevitably reach for my brush or try his hand at mixing paints, thinking this would draw us closer. I appreciated his enthusiasm, but it often felt like an intrusion. One Saturday afternoon, I was preparing to start a new canvas, envisioning a vibrant sunset that fused fiery oranges with deep purples. It was the kind of piece I desperately wanted to share with the world. As I organized my paints, Henry strolled in with a new set of acrylics he'd picked up from a nearby store. "I thought we could have some fun today," he said, his eyes bright with excitement. I felt a pang of annoyance, but instead of voicing it, I smiled and suggested we hang out first, letting him have the run of my living room with his beginner's brushes. He agreed, and we spent a while chatting, munching on snacks, and throwing paint at some scrapboards I didn't mind getting ruined. But then things took a turn. After seeing me work, Henry casually, almost haphazardly, grabbed one of my larger canvases, the one I had set aside for my sunset masterpiece, and started to cover it with a vibrant green blob. My heart sank as I froze, watching him work. "No, no, no," I whispered more to myself than to him. "That's not. You can't just," but before I could articulate my frustration, he stepped back and said, "Look at that. I made something." All I could see was the destruction of my vision, the piece I had been nurturing in my mind for days, reduced to a chaotic mess of colors that didn't belong. Bitterness seeped through my resolve, and I attempted to explain how important that canvas had been to me, but he just shrugged, a smile plastered on his face, completely unaware of my growing agitation. It felt like a betrayal, and at that moment, I couldn't find the words to convey how hurt I was. The day ended on a strained note, and after he left, I hovered over the ruined canvas, tears pooling in my eyes. I didn't even want to look at it anymore, and something inside me snapped. I rolled it up and tossed it into the trash, almost feeling an odd sense of satisfaction as I did so. But relief quickly morphed into guilt. The next day, Henry asked about it, and I could see the excitement in his eyes as he recalled that moment of impromptu collaboration. I hesitated, my throat tightening as I confessed what I had done. Henry's expression turned from amusement to astonishment. "You threw it away? Why would you do that?" I wanted to scream my frustration at him, explain how he'd ruined something precious, but instead, I felt small. "Because it was mine, Henry. And it meant something to me," I finally managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. The silence that enveloped us felt heavier than ever, and he just nodded, looking away. I expected an argument, a confrontation, but instead, we both stood in the fallout of a decision that had felt both impulsive and justified. "You didn't even care about it," he countered quietly, hurt flashing across his features, and in that moment, I realized the different ways we valued art and expression. We didn't see eye to eye, and maybe we never would. That evening, I sat alone in my studio, contemplating my actions. It wasn't just about the canvas. It was about communication, respect for one another's passions, and how quickly love could devolve into misunderstandings. I thought about the work I wanted to do, the emotions that needed to flow, and I knew I had to reach out to Henry, to explain further, to tell him how much his excitement meant but how it clashed with my creative process. As the moonlight spilled through the window, illuminating my untouched canvases, a sense of clarity washed over me. Perhaps that was the lesson in all of this, not just about art but about understanding each other as we tread through our distinct worlds. Our relationship needed open conversations, a commitment to honor each other's spaces. I texted him, asking if we could meet and talk. He replied almost instantly, saying he'd really like that. As I prepared to step into an uncertain but necessary conversation, I was left contemplating whether I was truly the a-hole in this situation, or if we were just two artists in a world that sometimes felt too confined. In the weeks that followed, we learned to navigate our differences, finding a balance between my art and his enthusiasm as we started collaborating on new projects where we could both express our creativity without stepping on one another's toes. The discarded canvas became a reminder of our journey, a testament to the struggles that could end in understanding, and in that rawness, our relationship grew stronger. Sometimes, I still wonder if I should have approached the situation differently, but maybe it was all necessary, a chapter in our story that led to deeper connections, both artistically and emotionally. As I reflect on those days, I find myself smiling at how we transformed our creative chaos into a symphony of collaboration. The discarded canvas, painted with reckless abandon and then marred by unintended destruction, eventually became more than just a victim of frustration. It morphed into a catalyst for growth. It was during one of those late nights, and we sat in our quaint little living room, filled with the smell of brush strokes and oil paint, that I realized how much we had changed. We had taken steps to infuse more understanding into our artistic practices, but more importantly, we were learning to navigate our lives together in a way that felt harmonious rather than combative. I remember the soft glow of our desk lamp casting shadows on the walls, flickering like the moments of doubt and hope that intertwined our stories. I had brought home a few canvases, each one a blank slate, eager to embrace the new chapters we were writing. We decided one evening to create a mural on the large wall in the living room, a combined testament to our growth and a reflection of our journey together. He suggested we blend abstract designs, flowing shapes that could symbolize our individual paths merging into one. The planning was half the fun, brainstorming in the late hours of the night, discussing colors, even arguing playfully about which patterns would complement the other's style. We stood shoulder to shoulder, surrounded by bursting tubes of paint and the remnants of our previous projects, as laughter filled the air with a warmth that made the room feel alive. It was in those moments I felt the cracks of our earlier misunderstandings start to heal, each stroke on our mural reflecting our innate desire to express who we were and what we had fought through, paving a road to understanding. Sure, there were still hiccups along the way, he made a few accidental spills, and I had my share of exasperated sighs, but the atmosphere remained playful and light, filled with the essence of compromise. The mural itself turned out vibrant and chaotic, with swirls of blues and greens colliding but still fitting together in a strange, beautiful way, just like us. Once completed, it became a conversation starter for our friends who came over, a visual representation of our evolution intertwined like threads in a tapestry. Even on days when I felt a shadow of doubt creeping back in, I'd look at that mural, its colors speaking unspeakable truths about our partnership, and a sense of pride would wash over me. Looking back, I see that, while the moment of throwing away the ruined canvas was driven by frustration, it was precisely what we needed to ignite not just a conversation but a whole new dialogue within our evolving relationship. It's intriguing how one little action can spiral into such immense growth, leading to a bond fortified by creativity rather than just love. Sometimes I still wonder about the piece that had been tossed away, what it could have transformed into had we taken a different route. Yet somewhere deep down, I realize that every discarded moment has its purpose, leading us to the vibrant mural on our wall, a tale of understanding that will forever remind us of the beauty found within the chaos of love and art. As the weeks melted into months, I often found myself drawn to that vibrant mural, a collage of colors swirling together in chaotic harmony. It spoke not just of our artistic journey but of our journey as a couple, reflecting every argument and every compromise we had navigated together. Each swirl represented a moment in time, a glimpse into what it meant to truly collaborate and communicate. The eventual blending of our styles created something entirely new, a unique expression that still felt like us but was also something beyond our individual selves. I'd catch myself smiling at it while washing the dishes or during evening chats on the couch, wrapped up in our shared warmth. Sometimes Jimmy would tease me about staring at our masterpiece for too long, claiming I had an obsession. I'd laugh it off, but deep down, I knew he was right. It was a part of our lives now, almost like a guardian watching over our routines. But even as we flourished, I couldn't completely shake off the shadows of that old canvas. There were nights when I would trace the outline of the mural with my fingers, feeling the layers of paint beneath my touch, and I'd remember that first piece, the potential it held and the frustration it had caused. Did I make the right call? Each time that question flitted through my mind, Jimmy would always sense my distractions. "You okay?" he'd ask, setting down his sketchbook and shifting focus onto me, his brow creased with genuine concern. His kindness washed over me like a warm tide, pulling me back from my musings, and I'd reassure him, reminding myself I had to let go of that weight. We continued to bond through our projects, but with every brushstroke we painted together, I also began to see the cracks in my own patience. I was forgiving of his exuberance, but frustration bubbled beneath the surface when he attempted to take creative liberties on my designs. It started innocently enough, a splash of unexpected color on a planned composition, but before long, he would challenge my intentions, suggesting changes that were more reflective of his style than my own, and I found that familiar tension creeping back in. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting warm orange hues across the room, I stood before our latest piece, a work we had both poured our souls into. Jimmy joyfully suggested one more addition, a bright green streak across the center, and I felt a strange pang in my chest, a warning against complacency. "Maybe we should leave it as is," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, but the smile slowly faded from his face. "Why? We could make it even better. We've come this far together," he countered, enthusiasm undeterred, his eyes widening with excitement. But as he painted the bold green, I stared at the disruption, feeling my heart race, bracing against what felt like an impending clash. Memories of the ruined canvas rushed back, and rather than feeling the joy of creation, I was suffocated by the fear of losing my artistic integrity again. "It feels wrong, Jimmy," I finally croaked, forcing the words through a tightening throat. His brush froze mid-stroke, and in that silence, I could almost hear the echo of every previous misunderstanding bouncing off the walls. "What do you mean wrong? I thought we were in this together." The hurt in his voice sent a shiver through me, every word punctuated with raw emotion. I hesitated, feeling the weight of my dilemma. I could either fight for my vision or consider his perspective, pondering the fragile state of our connection. In that moment, I closed my eyes and chose vulnerability. "I'm scared, okay? I mean, look at what happened last time. I don't want to lose control like that again." The walls around my heart began to crumble, and as I opened my eyes, I found him staring back at me, the light reflecting concern on his face. "I get that," he said softly, taking a step back, "but it's not about losing control. This is collaboration, and collaboration means trust. I trust your judgment, and you have to trust mine too." Looking at him, I couldn't help but wonder how this relationship had transformed, how personal this bond had become, an intimate dance between passion and compromise. It was true, I had to let go of the past. I slowly lowered my guard, and instead of shutting him down, I proposed an idea that felt both risky and liberating. What if we painted some smaller pieces together, just as a way to test our balance? If we don't like something, we can always paint over it or let it go. He blinked at me, surprised, and a slow smile crept along his face. "I like that. A fresh start, right?" And just like that, a new dialogue brewed between us. We committed to smaller projects, immersing ourselves in trial and error rather than tangible expectations, opening ourselves to failures but celebrating the little moments of creation. As we painted, the air around us thickened with laughter, music, and a newfound understanding. The mural became a backdrop for our evolving friendship, and each smaller piece that emerged without the weight of overthinking became a splash of relief amidst our artistic memories. A couple of weeks later, as we stood before a series of colorful canvases strewn across the floor, I felt a warmth flood through me upon realizing how far we had come. The shadows of doubt hadn't vanished, but they danced around the newfound light we were cultivating. I knew this journey would continue to challenge us in unexpected ways, but with every stroke, we embraced the beautiful chaos. Even as I glanced back at the mural, I smiled at our past as much as our present. Together, we were crafting art amid the uncertainties of life and love, learning not just to cope with the unknown, but to celebrate it, a vibrant tapestry of joy and growth. And with that reflection warm in my heart, I felt hopeful about what lay ahead, both creatively and relationally. We had found a rhythm woven not just through our art but through our trust, our patience, and our growing love, inching us toward vibrant futures together. For as long as I can remember, there has been a phrase that rattled around in my mind like an old song stuck on repeat: you can't have your cake and eat it too. It was one of those sayings my mom would toss out during our weekly Sunday dinners, not that I ever really understood what it meant. I mean, if you had cake, wouldn't you want to eat it? That question had gnawed at me since I was a kid, and as I grew up, I started to view this conundrum as a metaphor for my life choices, especially as I navigated the tricky waters of my on-again, off-again relationship with Jess. Jess and I had met in college, our paths colliding like two planets destined to orbit one another. We had our highs, filled with the light of new love, lazy Sunday mornings, laughing endlessly over board games, late-night cooking experiments that usually ended in disaster. But the lows could drag us deeper than I cared to admit, arguments about petty things that ballooned into volcanic eruptions, only for us to push reset and pretend they never happened. It was after one such heated fight about where we wanted our lives to go that I found myself on Reddit, sipping my lukewarm coffee, scrolling through Ask Reddit threads, looking for solace or validation. Someone had posted about phrases that made no sense, and there it was again, the phrase that haunted me: you can't have your cake and eat it too. I chuckled bitterly, realizing that it encapsulated my dilemma perfectly. I wanted both the stability of a committed relationship and the freedom to explore who I was apart from Jess. And with each scroll, my mind started to race. Was I being unfair by wanting both? As I deliberated, a thought struck me: maybe I was supposed to just decide, but how could I when each option felt fundamentally flawed? Jess had been so supportive of my dreams, but I couldn't shake this feeling that I was suffocating her with my indecisiveness. I decided to invite her over, thinking it might be easier to untangle these thoughts together. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow through the window, highlighting the chaos of our living room, books scattered on the floor, takeout containers still on the counter. When Jess arrived, her smile lit the room, but I could sense an undercurrent of tension vibrating between us. We sat on the couch, awkwardly trying to make small talk, but it soon fell flat. Finally, I took a deep breath and plunged into the depths of my thoughts, spilling out my fears and uncertainties while she listened, her face a mixture of surprise and understanding. I confess that I felt like I was wanting something I couldn't clearly define. Jess nodded, allowing me to speak without interruption, and when I finished venting, she looked at me softly. "It sounds like you're scared, but not of me or us," she replied delicately. "You're scared of becoming stagnant." Her words hung in the air, heavy with recognition. I hadn't put it together until she said it, but she was right. A part of me longed for adventure, the wild insatiable need to travel, to breathe experiences beyond the confines of our small town. Jess offered to help me explore that, suggesting weekend trips or classes that could satiate my craving for more, grounding me while still letting me spread my wings. And as we talked into the night, I felt that familiar warmth settle back into my chest. When I finally went to bed, it struck me, perhaps the real wisdom was in the idea that choices didn't have to be rigid. Maybe I didn't have to sacrifice one happiness for another. Maybe I could bake two cakes, one for now, and one for later. Weeks passed, and our dynamic transformed. We found ourselves signing up for dance classes together and planning a small trip to the mountains, combining my longing for freedom with our shared commitment. The phrase that had once felt so suffocating began to lose its power over me. I realized that while you can't have your cake and eat it too in a literal sense, life isn't always that black and white. The more I allowed Jess in on my dreams, the more support I felt, freeing me to embrace the complexities of my existence. In the spirit of the Reddit threads I had once sought comfort in, I thought it fitting to provide a little update, an epilogue of sorts. About a month later, Jess and I were planning a spontaneous trip to a beach we hadn't been to since early summer. As we drove, I turned the radio down and asked, "So, what do you want to do after this? More travel? Classes?" She looked at me, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "How about both? We can have our cake and eat it too," she teased, and I burst into laughter, realizing that perhaps my journey to find balance was one I could continue sharing with her. That night, as I fell asleep, I felt liberated knowing that my life didn't have to adhere to anyone else's rules, and while I might never fully grasp the meaning behind that silly saying, I could at least make my own sense of it all. The days that followed were a delightful haze of spontaneous adventures and late-night musings, the kind of soft chaos that comes from living life on your own terms. Every morning, we'd meet at our favorite cafe, a cozy little place with creaky wooden floors and mismatched chairs that felt like an extension of our own eclectic personalities. The owner, an eccentric old man named Jonah, would greet us with the same goofy grin each time, saying, "You're two peas in a pod, ladies." It became a running joke, one that made us chuckle as we sipped steaming cups of coffee and shared our dreams, from obscure travel destinations to the prospect of enrolling in courses that would allow us to explore our creative sides. One morning, Sarah suggested we sign up for a pottery class. "Imagine the mess we'll make. It could be a disaster, but a fun one," she nudged, her enthusiasm infectious. I hesitated at first, intimidated by the idea of molding clay, then remembered my newfound mantra about balance. "Why not?" I said, surprising myself with my own eagerness, and we soon found ourselves with our names on a list beside a host of other brave souls willing to wrestle with their artistic limitations. The class turned out to be one of the most rewarding experiences. We fumbled, laughed, and accidentally flung handfuls of clay at each other. The instructor, a warm woman named Linda, guided us patiently, her laughter ringing through the studio as our creations often morphed into something unrecognizable. Yet, with each failed attempt, I felt my heart loosen, the tension of needing to excel slipping away with every imperfect pot or crooked vase we shaped. It was liberating in a way I'd never expected, the act of creating becoming a therapy session and a celebration of our flaws and companionship. After one particularly absurd class where we mistakenly mixed red and green clay, resulting in an unpleasant shade that resembled an unappetizing stew, Sarah turned to me, her hands covered in a mixture of colors, and said, "Look at that. We just became abstract artists." As weeks passed, we also found ourselves exploring goods at local flea markets, capturing moments with our phone cameras, and building an impromptu scrapbook of our debauchery, filled with ripped ticket stubs, photographs of us making exaggerated silly faces, or random notes we jotted down purely for laughter's sake. One evening, while flipping through our new book of misadventures beneath the glow of fairy lights on Sarah's balcony, a wave of pure gratitude washed over me. I couldn't help but reflect on how far I had come from being trapped in the rigid expectations I'd once believed I had to follow. It was as if I had been carrying a heavy backpack filled with old ideas and rules about how life should be lived, and each experience with Sarah helped me to shed a few more pounds until I felt free to walk my own path. But just as I began to feel I had everything figured out, life threw a curveball. One night, after a lovely dinner where we feasted on Thai takeout and laughed until our cheeks were sore, Sarah suddenly grew quiet. I noticed her staring at her phone, her brow furrowed and lips pressed into a thin line. "Hey, what's wrong?" I asked, concern threading through my voice. She glanced up, trying to muster a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "It's my mom," she said softly, her voice trembling ever so slightly. "She's going through a rough patch. I think she might need me." My heart sank at the thought of her leaving, the thought of losing what we had begun to build together in this journey of balance and creativity. In that moment, I felt a familiar knot of uncertainty tighten my chest again. "How long are you thinking of going?" I asked, keeping my voice steady despite my inner turmoil. Sarah took a deep breath, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "I don't know. A week maybe? She just sounds really overwhelmed and I feel like I should be there." As she spoke, I could see the conflict written all over her face, her desire to support her family clashing with the joy she had found in our friendship. I felt a pang of selfishness at the very thought of her needing to leave. How could I remind her of the beautiful balance we had created if I was only thinking of myself? So, I reached for her hand, intertwining our fingers in a brief moment of solidarity. "Sarah, you have to go. Family comes first, and I would never want to hold you back from that." We both sat in silence for a moment, holding on to each other, and I assured her, "I'll be right here when you come back. We can pick up where we left off." She nodded, a smile breaking through her sadness, but I could detect a hint of guilt in her eyes. I didn't want my own fears to dim the light of her compassion, so I wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her close as memories of our laughter filled the air around us. In that embrace, there was an understanding. She needed to care for her mother, and I needed to let her go, at least for a little while. That night, as sleep washed over me, I wrestled with conflicting emotions, but I took comfort in the thought that we were both on our own journeys toward the elusive balance we sought. In the following weeks, Sarah was often across the phone screen, sharing snippets of her time with family, moments punctuated with laughter, but also clouded by a piercing worry. I kept up with our pottery class, crafting lopsided creatures that always brought me back to her and her infectious laughter. Each day felt like an exercise in patience, but I focused instead on immersing myself in my own creations, slowly learning that empty time not spent with friends could still be filled with purpose. Eventually, after what felt like an eternity but was merely a month, the day arrived when Sarah called, her voice ringing bright and clear on the other end. "I'm back. And I've missed you like crazy," she exclaimed, an effervescence that rivaled the bubbles in the soda I was currently sipping. We scheduled a reunion filled with stories and laughter over our favorite meals, but more importantly, it became an opportunity for both of us to share our growth during our time apart. As we settled on her balcony, our familiar space, I was overcome with a sense of completeness. As she spoke about her experiences with her mother, I realized that the meaning behind those quirky expressions we often laughed about had shifted yet again. Life was about embracing the chaos, the uncertainties, and the joy that comes from simply being present with each other, much like our beautiful messes in pottery class. And as the sun set, casting a warm golden hue over our playful surroundings, I felt not only the sensation of our connection rekindling but the understanding that balance didn't mean never being apart. It meant knowing we both could carry our journeys and support each other all the same. Looking back, I'd find it easy to chuckle at the foolishness of sayings that once perplexed me. Having our cake and eating it too became a cherished memory of sweet times shared, both together and apart. And as I lay my head down to sleep that night, the warmth of reconnection enveloped me like a soft blanket, reminding me that the true essence of balance was found not in the rigid chapters we penned but rather in the laughter, the love, and the art of simply being. In the weeks that followed, I found myself tackling each day with a renewed spirit, a vibrant sense of possibility filling the corners of my mind that had once been dimmed by the weight of expectations. Amelia and I dived into spontaneous adventures, our schedules freeing up in ways I had never thought possible. One weekend, we hopped into her old hatchback, the jazz music pulsating through the speakers, the air thick with the scent of blooming wildflowers as we drove toward the mountains. We ventured off the beaten path, often leaving our plans in the dust, reveling in the act of simply exploring. I remember one particularly magical afternoon when we stumbled across a hidden waterfall. Its waters glimmered like diamonds in the sunlight, and as we stood there, the roar of the falls cascading down drowned out the noise of the outside world, leaving only the sound of our laughter echoing around us. I found the purest joy in those moments, a kind of euphoria that made the silly saying, the one I had initially brushed off as nonsense, now feel like a charming puzzle I wanted to solve. Every time we indulged in a piece of cake, whether it was a slice from a charming coffee shop or the store-bought kind savored after an exhausting trek, it came wrapped in laughter, sweetening our wouldn't have been happy about it days. Yet amidst the joy was a quiet understanding that our journeys were not without their challenges. Each of our individual paths had begun to twist and turn, bringing unexpected obstacles even as they interwove now with shared dreams. As the leaves began to change with the approach of fall, a hint of worry settled in my stomach, neutralizing the sweetness of those carefree days with a pinch of salt. I felt a growing pressure about the decisions looming ahead, my career trajectory, my financial goals, the desire to move forward while also nurturing the beautiful bond we had started to build. One evening, as we sat by the fire at her family's cabin, I let those thoughts spill out, almost reluctantly. Does it ever feel like we're on a tightrope, swinging back and forth with so many expectations? I asked, watching the flames flicker and dance. The crackling would wrap around my voice, giving it a moment to linger in the air. Amelia paused, her marshmallow on a stick hovering over the embers. "Oh, totally," she chuckled, but there was an edge of seriousness behind her laughter. "You feel like you can only take one step before something gives?" She continued, her expression thoughtful, but vibrant with understanding. Her candidness made it easier for me to articulate the knots I had been tying in my chest. "I don't want to let go of these moments with you, but I also don't want to be chasing after shadows when there's a whole sun rising over here," I confessed, the warmth of the fire reflecting in her deep-set brown eyes. Somehow, my heart felt lighter after sharing, almost as if exposing those fears to the open air could diffuse their weight. She reached for my hand, a firm squeeze that reminded me we were in this together, even if the answers remained fuzzy. "Maybe balance doesn't mean splitting everything in half," she proposed, a smile breaking through the seriousness that filled our exchange. "What if we don't chase some imaginary ideal? We embrace this mess of emotions and decisions." As she spoke, I felt the tension ease, the warmth of her words curling around my heart like the smoke swirling above us. We settled into a comfortable silence, the only sounds being the crackling fire and the occasional pop of the wood, sensations that felt grounding amidst the shifting sands of our thoughts. They say it takes time to grasp the meaning behind common sayings, but in this moment, I understood that finding balance didn't require perfection. It simply needed honesty, understanding, and the willingness to reshape the narrative. Weeks turned into months, and together, we picked through the chaos, sometimes stumbling, but more often laughing, the echo of our carefree adventures merging with the sounds of life ahead. The holidays approached, and with them, discussions about where we might go next and how we could create lasting memories together. One evening, as snowflakes blanketed our town, I made a cake, our favorite recipe, as a way to toast to where we were and where we might go. The scent of vanilla woven with cinnamon filled her kitchen, wrapping us in warmth while echoing with nostalgic laughter from our past. As we enjoyed that cake, rich and decadent, it hit me how much I had grown. In my urge to find clarity, I had found companionship and the beauty of shared experience. I had learned to savor not only the sweet moments but also to embrace the complexities of life that often trailed behind, understanding that even in chaos, there could be joy. And it was in that kitchen, laughing over crumbs and crumbs of conversations, that I realized this journey was as much about cultivating joy in the mundane moments as it was about making big plans for the future. Months later, and as I sit here now reminiscing on those days, I have a sweet piece of knowledge tucked away in my heart. It isn't just about having our cake. It's about finding the right people with whom to share it, making sense of the nonsense together, crafting our own meanings, and knowing that in our laughter and shared experiences, we were crafting a life that looked unexpectedly beautiful. And so, with the summer sun peeking through my window and the birds chirping in delight, I take a deep breath, ready for the chapters that lay ahead. Blissfully unaware of the surprises they might hold, I still remember the sound of my heart thumping in my chest, a primal rhythm interrupted only by the low hum of chatter from the family gathering. Christmas had always been a chaotic blend of laughter and light amidst the stress of looming responsibilities. But this year felt different, it felt heavy. My Uncle Harold was the center of attention, regaling everyone with elaborate tales of his upcoming surprise vacation to the Maldives for his daughter's Christmas gift, a trip that might as well have been a vacation of the gods. A sun-soaked getaway, oceans kissed by golden rays, while I sat a mere 10 feet away, feeling the tightening knot of resentment coiling in my stomach, the air thick with something bitter and unspoken. Just a few months back, he had borrowed $700 from me, promising to pay it back by summer, but summer had turned to fall and was now fading into winter, and here he was, talking about flopping on a beach while I was left holding the weight of unpaid debts and dwindling savings. The world outside the window streaked with winter sleet seemed a stark contrast to the sun-drenched life he was about to embark upon. I hadn't begrudged him his joy, but as he continued to expound on the grandeur of this vacation, my fingers involuntarily clenched around my glass, my knuckles turning white. I could feel the warmth of the room, the lights twinkling merrily above us, while my thoughts swirled with unease and doubt. Was I being unreasonable? Was it wrong to feel this way about family? They say money and family don't mix, and yet here I was, struggling to reconcile my love for my family with the hurt of when it felt like we were no longer on the same playing field. With every laugh and cheer from the gathered relatives, I felt the walls closing in around me, pressing on my chest until I could hardly breathe. I thought about his daughter, how this vacation would be something magical for her, a memory that would last a lifetime. But that didn't change the fact that I needed that money, too: bills, groceries, a pair of shoes that didn't have a hole worn through the sole. And then something snapped inside me, birthed from a mix of frustration and desperation. My voice broke the laughter like a sudden winter chill cutting through warm air, and I caught everyone's attention, all faces looking towards me. "Harold, can we talk about that loan?" The room fell quiet, the joyful energy draining from my words as the focus shifted from dreams of sun-soaked bliss to the heavy topic of debt. Harold looked taken aback, his expression shifting from jovial to defensive, his boastful demeanor deflating like an untied balloon. "What are you talking about?" he replied, the twinkle in his eye replaced by something darker. I could feel the weight of my words, like stones thrown into a placid lake, rippling out to the circles of family surrounding us. "The $700 you borrowed? I really need it back." There was an awkward silence, filled with muffled gasps and glances exchanged between family members, their expressions a mix of shock and, I could swear, a hint of contempt. I'd broken an unspoken convention, drawn back the curtain that shielded our family's fragile dynamics. Harold bristled, his pride wounded yet hidden behind a facade of casual irritation. "Come on, you know I'm good for it," he replied, the bravado slipping back into his tone. "This trip is for Sarah, don't make this about money now." But it was all about the money I had graciously lent him in confidence, thinking I'd be repaid before the year turned another page. I saw the embarrassment flicker in his eyes, fleeting yet sharp. I pressed on, my voice steadier than I felt inside. "I shouldn't have to feel guilty for needing what's already mine. I saved up for ages to lend it to you." The conversation dwindled into muffled complaints from Harold and whispers from the other relatives. It was like watching a car crash in slow motion, unable to look away as the anger simmered beneath the surface. It felt excruciating yet liberating to have put it out there, a gaping wound laid bare that couldn't be sewn shut. In that moment, I realized the cost wasn't just material, it struck at the very heart of familial trust, turning us both into strangers fighting for something that had once been given freely. The evening wore on, and Harold eventually retreated from the conversation, a shadowy figure reclaiming the spotlight with half-hearted laughter. But I had crossed a threshold, and though the breadcrumbs of resentment might linger, I felt a strange lightness, an acknowledgement of my own needs amid the familial chaos. The unease didn't dissolve entirely, but I found peace in confronting the truth, and I experienced the beginnings of guilt dissipating, leaving space for clarity in its wake. A few days post-Christmas, I received a text from my uncle, a simple "Hey, let's get together, I'd like to clear the air." He'd agreed to pay me back in installments, starting with the first next week. I felt a rush of mixed emotions as I read the message. Relief washed over me, yes, but with it came a creeping wish that things didn't have to be difficult, ignited by the knowledge that confronting him had altered our relationship forever, shifting some foundational floorboards that would never return to their original status. I realized then, processing this new ground we stood upon, that sometimes, families could only rediscover themselves through honesty, grimy and raw as it may feel, but worth the discomfort for the sake of healing. As the weeks progressed, I found myself caught in a curious limbo. Each time my phone pinged with a message, my heart fluttered with a mix of anticipation and anxiety, anticipation for a glimpse of the man I'd once called my uncle and anxiety about what each check-in would herald. His first payment arrived promptly the following Friday. I remember sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the envelope that bore my name, the familiar handwriting inside. It felt strange, like crossing forbidden ground, as if opening that envelope would further peel away the layers of our relationship, revealing the raw truth beneath. The moment I pulled out the check, a wave of relief surged through me, quickly followed by an echoing reminder of his promises. The feeling was bittersweet. I was grateful for the money, of course, but I couldn't shake the heaviness in my heart. That Sunday, family dinner rolled around, and with it came a palpable tension gnawing at the corners of my mind. We gathered in my parents' living room, the air thick with the scent of my mom's famous roast. Laughter bubbled up around the room as my relatives exchanged jovial stories, their raucousness contrasting sharply with my internal struggle. I could see my uncle from across the room, dapper in a sharp suit that made him look 10 years younger than his age. He was animatedly sharing plans for the trip to the Maldives, his daughter perched atop the arm of the couch, her excitement radiating. She beamed with pride, blissfully unaware of the cautious glances exchanged between her older cousins and me. Each vivid detail he described felt like a dagger to my gut. The sun-drenched beaches, the luxurious villa, the words dripped with privilege while the reality of his debt loomed heavy behind them. I swallowed hard, recalling our conversation from a few weeks back, the discomfort we'd navigated, and the truth I had dared to share. Eventually, I caught my uncle's eye. His expression shifted instantly. Gone was the carefree demeanor he wore when speaking of the Maldives. Instead, it was replaced with something akin to shame, or perhaps just a flicker of guilt. I hesitated, wondering if I should follow through with this newfound understanding between us, or allow silence to wrap around us like a thick fog. But as the evening wore on, the bravado in his words became harder to listen to. The laughter felt hollow. I clenched my jaw, trying to focus on a game of charades unfolding nearby, but inside, I was seething, a simmering pot about to boil over. Then, as if on cue, the family buzzed around, exchanging placid nods, all oblivious to the storm swirling in my mind. I stood up abruptly, meeting him halfway across the room, and as I did, time felt suspended. I couldn't fully articulate what drove me to speak, but the warmth of his laughter abruptly halted as I reached him. "Can we talk?" I asked, my voice barely above the restaurant chatter that reverberated around us. His face paled slightly as he glanced over at my parents, then nodded stiffly. We stepped into the adjacent kitchen, the cacophony of family momentarily muffled behind the door. "About the Maldives," I started, carefully measuring my words, "it's just..." I took a deep breath, forcing myself to be honest. "I don't understand how you can afford that when you owe me $700. There was a pregnant pause, and I could feel the air thickening between us. His eyes flickered with indignation before his shoulders slumped, exhaustion crumpling his facade. "You're right," he breathed, running a hand through his hair. The honesty in his tone caught me by surprise, a raw admission that echoed back through the familial halls we wandered. In that space, I sensed the weight of secrecy being lifted, if only slightly. As we stood there, the conversation slowly unwound, the debts, the choices he'd made, the regrets he wished he could reclaim. I saw him, not as my uncle who flaunted his apparent wealth, but as a flawed man grappling with his own decisions, navigating the murky waters of his life just as I was navigating mine. Both of us had been on different paths, yet somehow, we arrived at the same crossroads. It was hauntingly familiar. When we exited the kitchen, I felt lighter, as if the dark clouds surrounding us had drifted apart even just a little. In the weeks that followed, my uncle resumed his payments, each one a silent promise that allowed us to rebuild an invisible bridge that spanned the chasm between us. Conversations became more open, and laughter wasn't forced anymore. It returned, gradually, restoring warmth to our gatherings. Eventually, he began to involve me in his plans, allowing me to express my dreams of traveling, not to the Maldives, but to places I yearned to see, and I recognized the transformation. I understood deeply now that confronting the hard truths had not obliterated our relationship, rather, it had reformed its very foundation. As Christmas approached, I found myself wondering more and more about the nature of family, the enduring bonds that tied us to one another, for better and for worse. Something closer to understanding blossomed. Perhaps, in our raw exchanges, we were somehow rediscovering the essence of connection, imperfect yet precious. Then, one cold winter evening, as snow blanketed the streets outside and the warmth of the season settled in our home, I received another tantalizing message from him, one that read simply, "Let's plan a family trip together next year, somewhere we can all go." It felt like an invitation to venture forth into unknown territory, and to that, I found myself wholeheartedly saying yes, feeling the comfort of adventure awaiting us, perhaps captured in the warmth of honesty instead of the weight of pretense. As I read his message, a rush of excitement coursed through me, merging with the ghosts of my earlier uncertainty. The thought of a family trip was exhilarating, like the first breath of fresh air after being inside on a stuffy day. I imagined us laughing together, making new memories, and perhaps even healing some of the rifts that had widened in our conversations. I envisioned sandy beaches and lush landscapes, places where we could leave behind the heaviness of family dynamics and indulge in pure joy, if only for a while. Nestled in the corner of my living room, with the faint smell of pine wafting from our modest Christmas tree, I couldn't suppress a smile. My heart swelled at the thought of reconciliation, of letting go of past grievances and embracing what lay ahead. In the following days leading up to the holidays, our conversations took on a newfound lightness. He opened up about his life in ways I hadn't expected, his struggles at work and the weight of being the family's financial provider. It felt surreal, sharing laughter about his daughter's seemingly endless wish list while in his shadow lay the burden of the previous debts and disappointments we had navigated. I caught myself thinking about how daunting the prospect of taking my family on a shared journey had once seemed, overshadowed by prior confrontations. Yet, here we were, mapping out a future that sparkled with possibilities. As we began planning the trip, each message exchanged felt like stitches weaving the fabric of our connection tighter. We explored myriad destinations, from tropical paradises to mountain retreats. My uncle's daughter chimed in with her ideas, and so too did my siblings, each contributing their wishes and hopes for this journey. There was something wonderfully liberating about immersing ourselves in a collective dream, a shared experience that bound us together through laughter and imagination rather than the weight of expectation or disappointment. The past, with all its burdens, faded into the background for those fleeting moments, and the prospect of adventure glimmered ahead like glistening snow under the winter sun. However, as the planning intensified, I found myself grappling with another wave of emotions. The shadow of my uncle's debt lingered in the back of my mind, creeping in like a winter chill despite the warmth of our newfound camaraderie. Would I be able to fully embrace this trip, carefree and lighthearted, knowing he still owed me? A part of me wanted to push the thought aside, to submerge the nagging feeling in a tidal wave of optimism, while another urged me to confront this lingering discomfort. I reasoned with myself that perhaps this is what forgiveness looked like, the conscious choice to move forward despite unresolved tensions, to embrace joy while still holding space for the healing that needed to occur. The weeks rolled on, and soon enough, the trip was finalized. We had settled on a tropical island with golden beaches and azure waters. As Christmas approached, I felt more connected with my family than I had in years, every message imbued with the fragility and strength of our shared journey. But the night before our departure, while bustling to pack, an unexpected reminder hit me when I stumbled across a handwritten note my uncle had sent long ago, the one where he'd promised to repay the debt. It was a small piece of paper with irregular handwriting, like a phantom drifting through my memories, a promise made during a time when things felt lighter, when the looming shadow of financial stress hadn't yet clouded our interactions. In that moment, all my emotional progress felt attacked. Conflicted by the weight of my own conscience, I decided to send him a simple text, an olive branch submerged in vulnerability. I'm genuinely excited for the trip, but I can't shake the feeling about the debt. He replied instantly, let's discuss it when we're away. I want to enjoy this break with you. Deep down, I appreciated his resolve to prioritize positivity over doubt, yet the flicker of unease within me charged the air like static electricity. As we arrived at the island, every moment was filled with laughter and light, the seashells sharp against our footprints in the sand. My uncle appeared to be genuinely enjoying precious time with his daughter, capturing memories in photographs that would surely warm our hearts in years to come, while I felt the shift within myself, an acceptance of the messiness of family. Yet, the acknowledgement of debts unresolved lingered, almost like a character in its own right, standing just outside the joyous frame of our vacation. I realized then how complicated it is to straddle the line between past pain and present joy, between memories that bind us and those that wound us. On the last evening of our trip, as the sun sank beneath the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and lavender, I knew I had to confront my uncle once more, my heart heavy but resolution firm. We strolled along the beach, the waves caressing our ankles, making the moment feel surreal. As the sky faded to twilight, I turned to him, prepared for the delicate balance of honesty and hope I had carried from home. It's been an incredible trip, but we need to talk about some things when we return, I began, about the debt. I want us both to feel free moving forward. He looked at me, eyes reflecting the fading sun, and sighed warmly as he nodded, granting me a sense of relief as the uncertain weight began to lift. Reflecting on it, I realized there might never be a perfect time to confront issues that cling to family dynamics like sea salt in air, and while the elements of debt still hung, our shared joy illuminated so much more. In vulnerability lies freedom. Sometimes, that's where the trips of a lifetime begin. It started with a mundane moment in our living room, me scrolling through my phone while my husband, Lucas, slumped into the couch, engrossed in a video game that he was utterly convinced was the best thing since sliced bread. The air buzzed with the sounds of gunfire and explosions while I obediently pretended to laugh at the banter with his online friends despite feeling an unsettling knot growing in my stomach. We'd been married for 3 years, and while I cherished our relationship, I constantly battled with the memories of what I had left behind when I'd moved to this small town to build a life with him. The friends I had slowly slipped away, and as a result, my social calendar had dwindled to much less than I would have hoped for. So, when I received the invitation that I knew he would despise, an opportunity bloomed inside me like a flower in the desolate landscape of our evenings. It was from my college friend, Mia, who had just moved back to town and was hosting a small get-together for everyone. Mia thrived in social settings, drawing people in like moths to a flame, while Lucas preferred his solitude, avoiding social interactions like a bear dodging the hunter. I wrestled with the ethical side of my decision all day, but each time I imagined how much I missed seeing familiar faces and sharing laughter, I put down the guilt and picked up the thrill of acceptance. I typed a quick response to Mia, accepting the invitation for both of us before I could think it through entirely. The day of the gathering arrived, and the very moment I mentioned it to Lucas, expecting a mild protest at worst, I was met with incredulity. His face morphed from confusion to disbelief, and he wordlessly stared at me as though I had grown a second head. "You invited me to a party? I don't want to go," he said flatly, his voice steady but the tension unmistakable. I felt the heat of his disappointment. Still, I couldn't bring myself to apologize for something that, in my mind, was necessary. "It'll be fun," was all I managed to say, hoping to sound convincing. His muted reply stung, but I reasoned if he could join in the effort, maybe he would learn to enjoy it, and we could reconnect with some of the people who made my past feel vibrant. But as the evening approached and the prospect of the gathering loomed, I could sense his resistance tightening like a noose around my chest. As we drove to Mia's place, the silence between us felt oppressive. Lucas gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles almost white against the leather, while I attempted conversation after conversation, each met with curt replies or muttered affirmations that fell flat. Reaching Mia's house unleashed an abundance of laughter and warmth, an intoxicating air that enveloped me the moment I stepped inside, but it was clear Lucas felt anything but welcoming. I introduced him to everyone, jubilantly urging him to loosen up, to mingle, but the feeling of his reluctance followed us like a shadow. Moments turned into an unrelenting ebb of discomfort as I found joy in reconnecting with old friends while he lingered at the edges, the distant figure who carried an invisible wall. I pulled away to check on him periodically, but his responses became fewer, shorter, almost strained. By the time the clock struck mid-evening, the festive mood turned sour under the weight of an unspoken animosity. Lucas had remained isolated, the distance muting the laughter and the cocktails swirling around me. My heart sank each time I caught a glimpse of his expression, somewhere between hurt and annoyance, and in that moment, I realized I had prioritized my desire for connection over his comfort. The party blurred into the background, and my resolve to stay strong began to quiver. Finally, as Mia initiated a group game that required partners, I looked at Lucas, who did his best to smile through clenched teeth but didn't move an inch. As the laughter erupted around me, I missed the sparkle of life in his eyes, and guilt washed over me as I felt trapped by my own choices. I wished desperately to turn back time, to have that moment at home again where I could have refused Mia's invitation from the start, protecting both my husband and myself from this brewing discord. With a heavy heart, I made my way back to Lucas, the laughter drowning in the realization that I could pull him back, but devoid of the spark that had brought me here. He was slipping away. "Can we leave?" he asked quietly, and my heart twisted painfully as relief finally washed over me. "Of course," I replied, the tension easing as I felt a mutual understanding wrap around us like a thin, tawdry blanket. We slid out of the warm embrace of the house, leaving behind echoes of laughter and familiar faces, heading home where I vowed to make amends. In the following days, the silence was laden with the weight of unspoken thoughts. Eventually, we found ourselves in that same living room again, this time under a calm atmosphere, the sun setting peacefully outside as we sat down together, his eyes meeting mine. I laid it bare, the guilt and the desire for understanding. To my surprise, Lucas shared his feelings too, expressing that my actions, while not malicious, had cast him aside in a moment critical to my rediscovery. It was an eye-opener for both of us, becoming a defining moment where we learned the importance of communication and the necessity of being both partners and friends. In hindsight, I understood I must never take liberties on his behalf again, and he recognized that while solace could be sought in our shared moments, it wouldn't always be his preferred silence. As I reflect on our story, I can't shake the feeling that we grew stronger that day. The tension that once lingered became a stepping stone for a deeper understanding. We laughed at the irony that tied our lives, realizing we were indeed partners in a balancing act of friendship against the backdrop of love. I share this now in hopes of letting others see the importance of clarity and connection in relationships, learning to stand side by side instead of drifting apart into uncertainty. And just when I thought it was the end, Mia started planning a redemption gathering, this time with the option to bring a partner. Consider our invitation for both of us a rather thoughtful approach that respects boundaries while still allowing for growth and connection. Ah, the irony and beauty of relationships. Perhaps the silver lining was that out of miscommunication, we discovered a deepened bond. As I gazed at the invitation clutched between my fingers, a soft breeze wafted through the open window, carrying with it the scent of early spring flowers blooming outside. It felt strange, looking over the neatly penned names and the proposed date that loomed on the horizon. The redemption gathering, as Mia had labeled it, presented a fresh opportunity that was both exciting and nerve-wracking. Reflecting on the past months following that heated argument with my husband, Alex, I found myself in a space that was surprisingly contemplative. The first gathering had been a disaster, awkward silences, forced laughter, and the sense that I had dragged Alex into something he genuinely disliked. The more I thought about it, the more guilt weighed heavily on my heart. Yet, that challenging experience seemed to have nudged us in the right direction. We had talked more openly since then, sharing our thoughts on expectations, personal boundaries, and what we truly wanted from our relationships, both with each other and with others. Still, the prospect of attending this new gathering brought back a flicker of anxiety. What if things went sideways again? What if Alex withdrew into himself, refusing to engage? The mere thought made me slightly nauseous, but I also had found that these moments of discomfort often led to the most profound growth. That evening, as the sky transitioned to a soothing shade of deep blue, I mustered the courage to broach the subject with him. Sitting across from Alex at our small kitchen table, I watched the light from the overhead fixture cast gentle shadows on his face. His brow furrowed as I laid out the details. "Can we talk about Mia's gathering?" I started, my voice steady but my heart racing. "She's decided to have a second one, and this time, it's open to partners." Alex lifted his gaze from the fork he was idly spinning. I could see the flicker of interest behind his eyes, though a shadow of tension clung to the corners of his mouth. Are you serious? You think we should go? I mean, I thought. I paused, uncertain how to phrase my thoughts without triggering any defensiveness. I thought it could be a chance to try again, to connect with people outside our usual circle. We wouldn't have to force anything, we could just see how it goes. He leaned back in his chair, a mix of contemplation and reluctance etching his features. You remember how the last one went, don't you? I felt so out of place. The music was too loud, and the conversations felt superficial. I do, I said softly, reaching across the table to take his hand. But we've had some time since then. I think we've both grown a bit. Plus, maybe we could come up with a plan together to make it more enjoyable for you. You can be involved with the choices this time. His gaze softened at my words, and for a moment, I could see the wheels turning in his mind. All right, he finally replied, the corners of his mouth curling into a faint smile. But only if I get to pick some activities. No more impromptu let's play this game situations. Deal, I said, relief flooding through me as I squeezed his hand. We spent the next hour discussing how we could approach the evening. We mapped out an escape plan, should he begin to feel overwhelmed, and even decided on what appetizer we might bring, something simple yet comforting. The more we planned, the lighter the tension in the air became. I realized how transcendent it could be to share such moments of vulnerability. The day of the gathering arrived, and as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with strokes of orange and violet, I felt an unexpected thrill run through me. The gathering itself unfolded more smoothly than I could have imagined. While there were moments when Alex would excuse himself to drink water or step outside for a breath of fresh air, he surprised me by interspersing these breaks with laughter and engaging conversations. It was as if he had stepped into an entirely new persona, comfortable yet refreshingly authentic. After the flow of conversation and refreshments waned, Mia decided to initiate an impromptu game. I could feel Alex tense momentarily, but instead of retreating back into his shell, he whispered to me, let's make it our own. And we did just that, molding the game to fit our comfort level. Laughter echoed around the room, and rather than feeling like spectators, Alex and I became participants crafting our moments together. At the end of the night, as we drove home, I glanced over at him, captivated by the peaceful expression on his face. I'm glad we went, he said softly. I didn't expect to have that much fun. As we settled into the quiet of our shared space, the tension that had once festered in the corners of our relationship began to dissolve. In those moments, I realized that vulnerability isn't just about sharing our fears and insecurities, it's about stepping forward into the unknown together, hand in hand. As the days passed, the memories of the gathering lingered, like a gentle reminder against the backdrop of our life together. Alex and I continued to communicate more, feeling our way through shared experiences, carving out areas where we could meet in the middle. The bond we forged grew deeper with each conversation, every shared smile, and even the silences no longer felt heavy, but rather embraced the soothing rhythm of companionship. And while I still sometimes replayed the moments of uncertainty in my mind, the invitations I accepted on his behalf, the guilt I had struggled with, it became evident that those choices, fraught with anxiety at the time, were stepping stones leading us into a future enriched by connection and understanding. With that in mind, I wrote a quick update to this story, unsure of how many might resonate with our experience but hopeful that it might provide a glimmer of peace for others. It might seem trivial, the little triumphs we achieve through discomfort, but in the grand tapestry of love and relationships, those moments are what fill the edges with color. In the end, it wasn't simply about whether or not I was the asshole for inviting Alex without his consent. It was a journey reflecting the beautiful complexity of partnership, each misstep becoming an opportunity for growth, each reluctance morphing into newfound strength. Together, we explored the intricate dance of acceptance and trust, our love flourishing amid the chaos. Sometimes, that's exactly what a relationship needs, a little risk, a little vulnerability, and a whole lot of love. As Mia's redemption gathering drew closer, my heart danced with anticipation, caught somewhere between excitement and nerves. I found myself daydreaming about what this gathering would entail, a cozy evening filled with laughter, warmth, and the reassuring hum of conversations weaving through the air like an old, familiar song. It was a promise of new beginnings, a chance to mend what had frayed and bring Alex and me closer to not only Mia but to the people who may have misinterpreted our earlier miscommunication. In the weeks leading up to the event, Alex and I delved into the depths of our partnership, discussing our feelings and expectations, both on a personal level and regarding our relationships with others. I was struck by the realization that communication, though often challenging, was a powerful tool we could wield together. We shared late nights filled with whispered confessions, laughter echoing into the dark, and moments of shared silence that spoke volumes more than words ever could. It wasn't easy, but as we navigated this terrain, I felt an unwavering sense of connection growing, blossoming amidst our conversations. The night of the gathering arrived with a crispness in the air, a soft embrace of autumn welcoming us at Mia's doorstep. She had transformed her living room into a comforting haven, with soft string lights casting a warm glow over the assembled group. Instantly, the atmosphere felt alive, buzzing with shared energy and the promise of heartfelt interaction. I looked at Alex, who stood beside me, his expression a careful blend of curiosity and cautious optimism. As we walked through the door together, I felt the weighted ties of my earlier mistake lifting, replaced by the buoyant possibilities of a shared experience. Mia greeted us with open arms, her smile a bright beacon amid the gathering crowd. The moment we stepped into that room, I realized how surrounded we were by friends who genuinely cared about our happiness, people who understood the complexity of relationships and were there not to judge but to embrace the beautifully messy journey we all traveled. As introductions floated around the room, I noticed Alex relaxing, allowing himself to be drawn into conversations, laughter bubbling forth as we mingled with others who had experienced feelings of alienation fully. We shared stories about misunderstandings and unexpected turnarounds, forming connections between kindred spirits navigating similar paths. The more I watched him engage with others, the more my heart swelled with love and appreciation for how far we had come. It was in this environment of acceptance that we began to open up further to one another, Alex sharing his initial apprehensions about the gathering, revealing how caught off guard he had felt when I accepted the invitation without discussing it with him first. The honesty in his voice was disarming, but I also recognized a hint of admiration, a testament to the connection we were fostering. Later in the evening, Mia gathered everyone around for a moment of reflection, inviting us to share something meaningful we'd learned about ourselves in recent times. As we went around the circle, I noticed the vulnerability threading through our words, with each story of miscommunication and growth echoing the themes of understanding and acceptance. When it was my turn, I spoke of the lesson I learned through this experience, emphasizing the importance of consent and the value of surprises wrapped in consideration. I could see Alex's eyes widening slightly in surprise, and at that moment, it struck me, together, we had crafted something beautiful from the raw edges of our previous missteps. As the night wore on, a gentle mix of nostalgia and hope enveloped me, and I felt an overwhelming gratitude for the way life unfurled itself before us like a tapestry continuously being woven. I realized that relationships are not dictated by the occasional blunders but are reinforced by our willingness to learn and grow through each encounter. Perhaps, in the grand scheme of love and partnerships, our moments of uncertainty were just stepping stones leading us toward greater intimacy and understanding. Later that night, we found ourselves heading home, the streets illuminated by the soft glow of street lamps. The silence between us felt comfortable. It was filled with understanding, shared smiles, and the occasional laugh as we recounted comical exchanges from the gathering. The past few weeks resonated within me as I took Alex's hand, understanding that our connection had woven a safety net beneath us, cushioning us from the chaos of life's little storms. The curious beauty of relationships was revealed, a mosaic crafted not merely from harmonious moments but from painful lessons, fractured expectations, laughter, and love, that weave into something extraordinary when nurtured tenderly over time. And as we settled into our evening routine, I felt lighter, the shadows of doubt fading far into the background. I realized that I wouldn't change a thing about our experience, miscommunication included. It simply added depth to our journey, breathing life into our bond. I knew then that we'd constantly be evolving, finding new ways to express our love and support for one another, always navigating together, ever so intricately, through the beautiful tapestry of our lives. The air hummed with the promise of tomorrow, and as I turned to sleep, I felt an exciting tranquility flow through me, offering ripe possibilities like a still river waiting to be explored.